And away we go. I am live here inside of the world headquarters or the 11th house. What's happening, everybody? Robert Phoenix. Welcome to another edition of the Friday FARcast. Excuse me. I'll be joined by Masaki Miyagawa in the second hour, and we're going to be talking about what's going on in California right now, some of the other events that are taking place globally, and getting ever closer to our somewhat secure yet shaky shores. We're going to be talking about Hawaii, and Masaki is just a real wealth of knowledge when it comes to things like what happens in the Asian community when it comes to things like esoterica in the Illuminati. He's pretty good friends with Daryl Yamamoto, who's written a book about things like Japanese bloodlines and the Japanese role in sort of illuminist activities. So we'll be talking about that, but we'll also be talking about Masaki's other kind of role or hat that he wears, which is that of a DJ, and he goes by Akaida, and he'll be at our event, and he'll be spinning and getting people moving under the full moon. It'll be great in October, on the first weekend of October. So he'll be here in the second hour, and everybody seems to be checking in, and there's Natasha and Danica, Michael, and Christy, and introspective woodworker Christine Muse. Uncle Glenn is in. Uncle Glenn cracking people up yesterday in the comments section. Joe Dimitri's here. There's Kathy Steen, my man, Steve Mercer. What's going on? Julianne. Hi, Julianne. Anna Erickson right in there, right at the top of the gate. So people are starting to, come in, assemble, and it's kind of a gray day out there today. I'll just flip this around. There it is. That is the outside world right there. This is my protection. This is my yellow jacket that protects my window. And ever since I started parking there, guess what? Nobody pulls in parks in front of my house anymore. That was happening. There were people that would just pull right up and just park right in front of this window. And all you got to do sometimes is just park. Lori, good to see you. I will be emailing you today, and we will sort everything out, and we'll get you in on the schedule. Debisu's here, Carolina in the Pines. Nice to see you. We'll just hang out for a little bit. And like I said, Mr. Masaki will be here in hour number 2. And before we get into that, there is obviously a lot to talk about. Hi, Marlene. Marlene and Lori, I think you guys live in the same state, if I'm not mistaken. Shirley. Hi, Shirley. Nice to see you. I look a little bit like I've got the John Lithgow hair from, I think, Buckaroo Banzai today. Needs a little attention. Terry Marine. Hey, what's going on, Terry? Nice to see you. Yeah, this has been a really, really interesting time. I've been actually losing subscribers. And it's a very unusual kind of phenomenon. It's an unusual phenomenon. I don't know why people leave. Sometimes it's because it's a money thing. Sometimes it's a personal thing. And what's hard is that, I have personal relationships with people. And so when they stop subscribing, it's like, okay, are we breaking up? It's like, and a lot of these people I've had contact with, and I've had relationships with. So when they stop subscribing, it's like, ooh, what happened? Did I say something? Did I say something? Was it something I said or did or didn't do? And, I don't know. Sometimes I reach out to people and find out why when I can. Sometimes they, don't have anything to say. Sometimes people just, do a hard 180. And I think that happens, it's like, and I've gotten to understand this about life. It's a journey, and sometimes people are, there's a reason, a season, and a lifetime, right? And sometimes it's a season. But I hope that the season doesn't end because it's something that's misinterpreted and something that's been not understood. And this has happened also with people occasionally when I'll say something and they will actually think that I'm talking about them, and that's not really true. That is not really true. And so then what happens is I wind up, um, having either another email exchange or another conversation to sort something out that was not meant or directed towards any particular person. So it's a weird kind of like place to be in when what I do is both sort of transpersonal and personal at the same time. And I try my best to stay up on stuff, and every now and then something falls through the cracks, and that's just the way it is. Like I said, I'm a one-man band. I'm a kind of a voice in the wilderness, and I don't have like a staff. I don't have a group of people that do PR or send out my emails or anything like that, right? So I'm trying to do everything at the same time, and if something does fall through, then I apologize. It's nothing personal, and if it's a content thing, and you just are in disagreement with my content, or that's the way it is, and I understand that. And if it's a matter of principle or personal philosophy, and you're really clear about that, and you just move on, I get it. We all have certain people that cycle in and out of our lives, and I'm probably one of them at some level. So my deal is not to take it personally, but when people, and there are people that unsubscribe that don't actually support the show, and I don't know when they unsubscribe. I don't know, but when they unsubscribe and they've been supporting the show, then I know, and that's when it's like, ooh, okay. And again, I don't do this. I mean, I do this for love and therapy and dharma, and I also do it to keep the lights on. So the subscription thing has really helped, and I'm going to be morphing that model, and that's going to be happening on the 22nd of September, and everybody who has been subscribing will be moved kind of into that model until the first of the year, and then that will change. And then after the first of the year, there's going to be a different kind of model where it's going to be basically one price, and it won't break your bank account. I'm just telling you that right now. But it'll be one price. You'll get everything. It'll be one level, one price. And the real reason why I'm going to be doing this is because I'll be streaming live off and through my website. So there'll be a half an hour where I'll be streaming live, and I'm going to hope to kind of stream and broadcast into as many places as possible that will take an SMTP code, or I think that's what it is, SMTP code, that allows me to broadcast and stream live for half an hour. So whether it's YouTube or DTube Live or Twitch, I'll set everything up so that for half an hour, you'll be able to watch it on as many platforms as possible. But then after that first half hour, those live streams will go dead. And if you're inside that space, which I'm going to be hooking up this weekend, if you're inside that space, then you get to watch the whole thing. And the good news about that is that I'll be able to play any video pretty much that I want. It'll be unfettered, totally unfettered. So that'll be good. I won't have to worry about, like, that first half hour. It'll be informative. It'll be vanilla. It will be vanilla. When you're going to be behind the quote unquote paywall, that's going to be a very different experience. And it's going to be a different experience about the things that I will probably say in certain ways. Again, none of it to be hateful nor disrespectful. I'm not about that. To the best of my ability, we're all human. But that's going to happen. And I'll be able to source certain videos that people like YouTube, or perhaps, I don't really think that BitChute gives a shoot. I really don't. You can put anything up there. But BitChute has become sort of like this, I don't know. BitChute to me kind of feels like the trailer park of the internet. And I don't mean that in a bad way. It just feels that way. For it, the look, the feel, it just kind of, it's like it kind of needs a bit of an upgrade. It needs a bit of an upgrade. And when I see certain people that are profiled on BitChute, when I go in there, it's like, some of these people I know and some of these people I don't know. And and maybe they're just trying to, surface content that is really based on sort of what they think I would like to see. Anyway, that's going to happen. And once that happens, it'll be very clean. I will still have a link to subscribe just at a basic $5 level if you just want to support the effort and what I'm doing. And that'll be, it's kind of a new model. And I'm working on that along with about 10,000 other things. So if I don't get to you, please don't take it personally. Please. And again, I'm just trying to keep up with everything, including the events in the world, including the events in my personal life, including the events in my professional life. So there's a lot of different streams going on. And I would love to be at a point where I could actually hire people and, have a real team. That would be so awesome. And, I'm going to put that out to the universe here for 2021 is, if we're going to continue to do this, and then this is going to have like some level of support. And I know that there's a lot of, spiritual support, and you guys have been great, when I've, put out the call. And right now I'm streaming on a computer that you guys helped bring into my life. Thank you. This is the computer that I was using when I was in the other location. And I've just kind of gotten it set up here. And it's not the most optimal operating system for StreamYard, but, it'll do. It'll do. StreamYard is really kind of built for Macs. And I went out and got a fast PC, right? So anyway, let's kind of get going here. That's just sort of the personal stuff, or at least the personal professional stuff. We'll be having a webinar tomorrow, and I will send out another email to people who may not have gotten the email through MailChimp. Some of you did, right? Some of you got that email. Some of you didn't. I don't know why. I don't know why that is. And I sent it out 2 times. Maybe it's the defaults. Maybe you got to check your. I don't. It's always hit and miss, right? If you, for me to actually make sure everybody gets into that inbox, I probably have to upgrade my MailChimp thing. But even then, I'm like moving to another, mail server or mail email client. So do I really want to do that for now? The answer is no. These are all details that you probably don't want to hear. But just a little behind the scenes of the daily sort of duty and dirty work that goes on here. And like I said, when somebody does stop subscribing, it's not that it's painful, but I always kind of go through my head. It's like, well, what did I do wrong? And can I write that? And sometimes it's just meant to be. So, but we like to get positive feedback, and the positive feedback is always, well, I'm doing well in terms of interpersonal relationships. I'm doing well with the content. Everything's clean. I'm doing well with the exchange of money and flow and time and effort. And when all that thing is really good, it's really good. And I think that's how we know that we're, doing something that's worthwhile in a lot of ways. And I know a lot of other content providers are up against the, similar kinds of circumstances. Now, everything is scalable. Like, do I really need a ton? The answer to that is no. I don't need a ton, but I need enough to continue to keep going, keep growing, right? Expanding a bit, keeping things alive so I can serve you. I watched Alex Jones last night for the almost first hour of his show. It was a fundraising drive. That's what it was. It was a fundraising drive. Alex Jones was essentially telling people that, he needs to sell product. And I've never seen him that aggressive before in some ways. He was really aggressive. Not aggressive in the sense that, he was saying, you better fucking subscribe, or I'm going to come knock on your door. He was basically saying, look, we've got about 3 months worth of fuel in the engine. And if we're going to get through 2021, then we need more assets and we need more resources. And I know, and I believe him. I believe him because he's had to shell out a lot of money for lawsuits. He's had to shell out a lot of money for expenses that, we don't know about. And, wherever you chime in on Alex, I kind of I'm on the on Alex side. Alex's big Achilles heel is there are certain people and certain groups that he will never talk about and he will never mention. One of the things, well, I don't have to fill in those blanks. You can do that on your own. And we know that there's a reason why that he doesn't kind of go down. And it's not just one group, by the way. There's a couple of other groups. And I'll just tell you one, Alex never mentions the Masons. He never mentions Freemasons. Never. And it's because he's a Freemason. There was a picture of him floating around on the internet with his Scottish Rites garb. So he never mentions Freemasons. And it's rare that he talks about Muslims. He does occasionally, but that's not his main focus. His main focus in terms of the threat are the Chinese, the globalists, George Soros. There you go. Chinese globalists, and then in that space he can kind of go after and target Bill Gates, Tony Fauci. There are certain people that he will target, the Democrats, Pelosi, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Every now and then, he'll do something that'll be mildly interesting and bring somebody into the fold. It's like, oh, really? But he had Steve Pieczenik on last week, and Steve Pieczenik said he was not a fan of the Constitution. I was like, okay, well, Alex, are you going to ask him about that? And there was no Q&A. They were just there to kind of slam Steve Bannon. So, but I do think that Alex Jones does play I still think he plays a pretty significant role in some ways. When he talks about the AI stuff and the UN, I think he's very on it. I think he's very on it. And he was playing this video of that big UN concert in the South Pacific, the one that I streamed and got in trouble for, by the way. I think that was the piece of content that I got in trouble for. The other thing is I was kind of basically capping on Jacob Blake's lawyer, and between that and that, but he was playing that UN video, and at the end of the video, those islanders, these beautiful people, are talking about there's a new day dawning and a new world order. It is like the UN New World Order song, and he was playing it, and he was singing along with it, and he was actually very funny. Actually, Alex Jones, I think, is very, very funny. So no matter what you think of him, I think he still serves a relative purpose. I don't watch everything on his show. I do watch David Knight because I like him. I don't watch a whole block. And the thing about Alex is that he's been blocked on so many levels. And every time he gets a new YouTube channel kind of up and running, like his pirate channel, they'll have maybe about a week or two of broadcasts on YouTube. And then they'll ask you to click on the content that says, oh, well, this is sensitive content. And by clicking on it, you're consenting. And there's a lot that happens almost every time. But those channels they don't last very long. So he has to go in and he's got to find a new channel. And that's what happens because they fund him. Well, they do fund him, but they don't fund him enough, apparently, because he needs a lot more money to continue his operation. Now, you look at his operation, and he's got a pretty world-class studio. He's got high HD cameras. He's got staff. I mean, it's all about scalability, right? It's all about scalability. So he needs a lot of money in order to keep his operation going. Do I need as much as Alex Jones? Well, no, because I'm not Alex Jones and I don't have all those people. But it'd be nice to pay some people. I would say that. It would be nice to actually have some people on the payroll that could actually help, really help out and keep this thing going for as long as we can keep it going. Because I think we all have to have some kind of, focalizing point. And I know that I'm not the only one, that there are a lot of other people out there. And related to which, Emily and I did a show last night. So I think that's going to be up on her channel today, The Matrix Mash. And we were talking at the end of the show about Joe Rogan. And Joe Rogan is the complete opposite of Alex Jones. And he really is. I mean, astrologically, they're complete opposites, total opposites. They're born exactly half a year apart. Alex Jones born on February 11th, Joe Rogan born on August 11th. So they are diametrically opposed, Aquarius and Leo. And you remember how I said that Leo is one of the easiest signs? That it was on my stream 2 weeks ago on Sunday night. Um, Joe Rogan just proves that. Joe Rogan is a Leo, and he has led that leonine life. Not to say that he didn't go through rough times as a kid. His part of Joe Rogan's backstory is that his father was a cop, and Joe Rogan's from Massachusetts, I think, right around the Boston area, and his father left the family, and and I don't think he had a lot of contact with his dad, but his mother remarried, and that's not always the case sometimes. Like, it's not always easy to remarry when you have kids. It's like people, both men and women, are kind of put into different buckets when they have those. And real love will step up and step through. So the guy that remarries or marries his mom turns out to be an architect. So, cop, honorable position, problematic, bringing the work home. Cop father leaves, and now he's got architect dad. Socioeconomically, that's an upgrade. It's an upgrade. And apparently, Rogan was working on construction jobs on buildings that his father essentially was either designing and or building. Okay, so that gives you kind of an insight. It's like, oh well, that was definitely an upgrade. And he realized by doing those construction jobs that hard work wasn't really his forte. And he was a really good Taekwondo fighter. He fought Taekwondo, full contact Taekwondo, and I think he won like Massachusetts Youth Championship 3 years in a row. So he was really accomplished. This is the Leo thing. And everything he did seemed to kind of work out. Right, and people thought he was really funny because he would crack jokes on the Taekwondo team. So they said, "Why don't you do stand up?" He bombed in his first stand up, but he got better and better and better. And before you do it, he hosted his own half-hour TV series on MTV. He had a half-hour comedy show. I think it was called the Half-Hour Comedy Hour on MTV, and he had a whole 30-second block. And you go back and you watch his videos, and he's really, really young. And he almost doesn't really look like himself today. And then he winds up going to LA, and it turns out to be like a really kind of amazing move for him. He starts doing the stand-up circuit in LA, like a lot of other people. Bill Hicks was there, Sam Kinison was there. It was really the golden era of comedy in California. I've lived in the Bay Area, and the San Francisco comedy scene was just off the charts. Like Robin Williams and Dana Carvey were there. That's just to name two. If I spent some time, Tom Kenny, he was in San Francisco. It was a huge time to be a comedian, and they would have a comedy contest every year. And it was really funny. There was this one guy who was very political. His name was Will Durst, and he was very big in San Francisco, but he could never break out of San Francisco. Bobby Slayton was another guy. I actually met Bobby Slayton one time. Anyway, who else was big? There was a guy. What was his name? His name was Michael. I want to say Pritchard or something like that. He had one of these very physical comedic faces, and he won the comedy competition a couple of years. But again, somebody who could not break out of that sort of San Francisco comedy ghetto. Dana Carvey had no problem. I mean, Dana Carvey. And I even went to college with a guy by the name of Greg Proops. And some of you might have seen that show, What's My Line, that Greg Proops hosted. I went to junior college with Greg Proops. I knew Greg Proops. And he was part of a comedy team with a guy by the name of Forrest Brakeman. So that was a time where, if you were funny, you could get a mic and you had a routine. I mean, there was opportunity there. And one year, Sinbad kind of rolled into town, and nobody knew who he was. And he rolled into town, and he won the comedy competition. And usually, if you won that, it was, kind of like the Willy Wonka golden ticket. So Joe Rogan really stepped up and went to California, got into the whole thing, did the Comedy Store. Everybody was doing that stuff, and he got that gig on, what was it, the radio show, and he basically played a kind of himself, kind of a lunkhead townie from Massachusetts, and that was I think there was about 4 seasons of that, and of course, tragically, the star of the show, died, and that was pretty much the end of the series, right? I think Andy Dick was on there, and that's a guy who really fell. Andy Dick really, really fell. Like, I think Andy Dick is living with his parents now. I think that's true. So after that show, he kind of bounced around a little bit, and then he wound up doing the UFC stuff and Ultimate Fighting. He didn't think it would work, but then he did it, and he did a lot of that stuff for free. Like, he did a lot of those early cage match interviews for free, and eventually led him to get a contract, to get actually paid to do the UFC stuff. And he knew all the fighters, and he was training with BJJ, so he was kind of on the inside. And then he lands the gig on Fear Factor, and Fear Factor made Joe Rogan a made man. That was it. He actually thought Fear Factor was going to fail. He thought it was the most stupid show ever. And I think he did 148 episodes of Fear Factor. And he says, like, after I did that, I didn't have to worry about money. That was it. He was pretty much set. And then that set him up, of course, for the podcast, the JRE. And now he's moving to Texas, $100 million deal on Spotify. That's a really, really big deal. Now, the downside of this, and this is what Emily and I talked about, is that they're taking away shows. Spotify is removing content that they deem to be either conservative or right wing or, alt-right. Those shows are going away. The Jordan Peterson stuff, gone. The Caleb Peterson stuff, gone. Alex Jones, gone. Those shows are gone. There are about 40 to 45 shows that Spotify just eliminated. Now, they're there on YouTube. You can still see those shows for now. But I think Rogan's got an agreement for a year where that stuff goes away. It all goes away. So if you're a Joe Rogan person, you want those interviews, you can probably download them. But Rogan's a guy that, again, it's not that he falls upward, but he's always ascending. And I do believe that it's a combination of things for him. It's talent. I do think Joe Rogan's talented. I do think he's smart. And he's also really supported by people that want him to be successful. That's another part of the deal. They want him to be successful. And he is connected to even people like George Soros through MAPS. And MAPS is a sponsor of Joe Rogan's program. And the way people sponsor Joe Rogan's program is that he doesn't do any commercials, but he talks about the products. He brings people on that are associated with either those companies or those groups. That's how he gets paid. So George Soros is a benefactor of MAPS. MAPS is essentially kind of a lobby, kind of a foundation and a research group that's dedicated to psychedelic medicine, right? Psychedelic medicine. So, he's got some very interesting bedfellows. And I think the thing about him is I think Joe Rogan has made, high-level company decisions along the way. That's what I think. He said, okay, I've got to do this. I have to basically change my game. It's like when you're a fighter, you have different styles when you fight. When you talk to a fighter, sometimes they'll do one style, sometimes they'll do another style. And I think Joe Rogan knows that. And so he's adapted his style for better or worse. Whatever you think about him. I'd rather go somewhere else. I think he's entertaining. Every now and then he'll have some interesting guests on. I don't do a steady diet of Joe Rogan. But I understand why he's successful. And Ani just said the Leo confidence helps. Absolutely. And, to be fair to him, I mean, when he was young, I mean, the guy was a stud. I mean, he was, he was a guy who, and I watched some of his Taekwondo stuff. He was very effective. He was very fast. He moved quickly. So, he's got that. And I've looked at his chart, and he has actually a very interesting chart. You can see why he's successful. Charts don't lie. They don't lie. You can see why he's successful. Anyway, there's a guy, he doesn't have to worry. He's got triple generational money. And I don't even think he's in it for that now. I think he's in it for something else. And I think he's in it to create the new paradigm. And if you want a point person for the new paradigm, a guy that gets 3 billion views a year, and that's really what he was getting through all the different platforms, 3 billion views a year. Think about that. Nobody really got that before. Johnny Carson didn't get that. David Letterman didn't get that. You add them all up, and they're kind of a drop in the bucket. So people understand the power and the reach of Joe Rogan. They get it. They want in on it, right? And he will work with them. I'm telling you, he'll work with them. And as long as he stays in the pocket, he'll be fine. And there's enough kind of rebel and enough kind of alternative stuff with Joe Rogan that people will still stay by him as long as he, pops a mushroom cap every now and then, and has somebody who might be a bit of an outlaw every now and then, Sturgill Simpson or Hank the Third or somebody like that. It's like, oh yeah, right. And and he has a kind of he's a good interview on some level. He's not like Alex who just. Anyway, there's my Joe Rogan thing. And yeah, it's part astrology, part talent skill, part people train spotting, that thing, and then promoting them. Now, was there any kind of a language or stipulation in his contract that says that they were going to do that? Maybe. We don't know. We don't know what the contract is. And, but it's happening. It's totally happening. Speaking of happening, let's get into some news here. We got about 20 minutes before Mr. Miyagawa joins us. And, there's always, what isn't there to talk about? So if you have not been paying attention, and I'm going to bring this back in some ways to this topic that I've been talking about. Let me get in here and do a little screen shareage. Let me get into the application window, Chrome tab. Let's check this out. So you guys are all over this. You've seen this. You know what's happening. Officers fatally shoot suspect in Portland protest killing. So here we go. Officials work at a scene late Thursday, September 3rd, 2020, where a man was suspected of fatally shooting a supporter of a right-wing group in Portland, Oregon. It's just this is AP, and they've got to play the divide and conquer game. A right-wing group. So I don't even want to get into it. Last week by the way, I don't think that those guys should have been in Portland. That I'm clear about. If you are in a riot situation, you are putting yourself in harm's way. You need to be able to understand that and deal with that. You need to deal with that. And I don't think they should have been there. That's just me. You go into a riot situation, you're looking for trouble. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about Kyle Rittenhouse. It's a bit of a different thing with Kyle Rittenhouse, which I'll talk about. Portland obviously has been, they've been ramping up now. There's a lot more police presence in Portland, both federal and otherwise. Ted Wheeler, they tried to set his condo on fire. This is the guy who tried to support Antifa. They were going to set his condo on fire. So now he's having to move. It was his birthday. They were going to give him a birthday present. And his birthday present would have been a new condo. They were turning his condo into a birthday cake. That's what they were doing. And they were lighting the candles. He's got to move now. So Wheeler obviously recognized this a few weeks ago. And you've been seeing a lot more clashes on the streets of Portland. So as a citizen, do you feel like you have to go in there and handle that? And I would say the answer with Portland is probably no. Kenosha is a different story. I'll talk about that in a second. So let's get into this. A team of law enforcement officers fatally shot a man suspected of being the gunman. So this is really mind-blowing. They know who the guy is. His sister fingered him. They arrested him, and they released him. He was at home. So he was suspected of being the gunman who killed the support writing group. Okay. Michael Reinhold, 48, was killed by a federal task force attempted to apprehend him near Lacey, Washington, about 120 miles north of Portland. Reinhold was suspected in the killing of 39-year-old Aaron J. Nilsson, who was shot in the chest Sunday night. A senior Justice Department official told the Associated Press. Federal agents from the FBI and U.S. Marshal Service had located him on Thursday after a warrant was issued for his arrest. This is a federal warrant. And Reinhold pulled a gun during the encounter. The official wasn't authorized to discuss the matter publicly and spoke to the AP on condition of anonymity. A U.S. Marshal Service statement later said the fugitive task force attempted to peacefully arrest him. This is right out of the page of the Bill Cooper book. Initial reports indicate that the suspect produced a firearm, threatening the lives of law enforcement officers. Task force members responded to the threat and struck the suspect, who was pronounced dead at the scene. The statement said the U.S. Marshals Service fugitive task forces, comprised of deputy marshals, other federal agents, and law enforcement officers from a variety of agencies, are responding for apprehending violent felons and other wanted suspects. Thurston County Sheriff's Lieutenant Ray Brady said 4 task force members fired their weapons, including 2 Pierce County Sheriff's Department deputies, an officer from the Lakewood Police Department, and an officer from the Washington State Department of Corrections. Brady said investigators haven't yet determined how many rounds were fired. The suspect was alone at the time of the shooting. Brady said with no children or other people present. Brady said he doesn't think the suspect lived at the address where he was shot, and it's not clear what brought him to Lacey. We don't know that specifically yet, Brady said. I do not believe that was his residence. Reinhold had described himself in a socialist media post as 100% Antifa, a regular presence at anti-racism demonstrations in Portland. He suggested the tactics of counter-protesters amounted to warfare. He had been shot at one protest and cited for having a gun at another. The tracking down of Reinhold, a dangerous fugitive, admitted Antifa member and suspected murder. This is kind of big news that AP is talking about, that he was a member of Antifa. They're actually recognizing Antifa in the press now. This is mildly interesting. A regular present at anti-racism demonstrations in Portland, he suggested the tactics of counter-protesters amounted to warfare. Right? So let's see, I just read that. Is a significant accomplishment in the ongoing effort to restore law and order in order to Portland and other U.S. cities. So this is fairly significant. Now, the 26th, he got shot near his elbow after he got involved in a scuffle between an armed white man and a group of young people of color. I mean, why do they have to do this? Why can't they just say an armed individual and a group of other individuals? Now we got to get. It's now very race specific when it matters. The man who was carrying that gun, Aaron Scott Collins, told the Oregonian, Oregon Live, that he and a friend had just left a bar when they saw a group harassing an older black man. Again, why couldn't this be a man? I guess now we have to be very specific. At this point, well, okay, we'll be very specific. His friend began filming them with a phone, and the group confronted them, calling them Nazis. He said. Reinhold later that day spoke to an AP videographer his arm wrapped in a bloody bandage. He said he was on his way to meet protest medics so they could change it. He said he didn't know what had started the altercation between Collins and the group, but that several people decided to intervene when they saw Collins fighting with minors. As soon as the adults jumped in, he pulled out a gun, Reynolds said. I jumped in there and pulled the gun away from people's heads, avoided being shot in the stomach. I got shot in the arm. So he was also wanted on a warrant out of Baker County in eastern Oregon, where court records show he skipped a hearing related to a June case, which he'd been charged with driving under the influence of controlled substances, reckless driving, reckless endangerment, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like a number of these people, sounds like he is an upstanding citizen if you live in a city of nihilists. So there you go. There is a blow against the anti-empire. This is going to be very interesting to see how this plays out. And so was it really a hit squad? Did they go in there with the intention of taking this guy out? Would they have arrested him? Did they really shoot him? These are all questions we have to ask. Will there be a funeral? Will there be a service? Will his sister who fingered him attend? Because the world is not what it appears to be. Never has. And it continues to be an operation of smoke and mirrors, especially now when we're in this whole Gemini phase with the True Note in Gemini. So we have to ask these questions. And on the surface, if it's true, if that's true, and these marshals went in and smoked them, then this is cranking everything up to a new level. Now, I said I was going to talk about Kyle Rittenhouse. And again, there's things about Kyle Rittenhouse that there are questions that need to be asked, like serious questions about the whole thing. And the one thing I would say in defense of Kyle Rittenhouse is that the law enforcement in Kenosha did a piss poor job of actually enforcing the law. They did not help people out. They did not stand by. The mayor and the governor denied any sort of help from the state National Guard. They told them to stand down. Federal National Guard, stand down. And the city was burning. Businesses were being burnt to the ground. Cars were being burnt. Cars were being torched. Fire departments were taking up to an hour or more to get to a business to help them, put out the fires of their burning businesses. They weren't there. And when they did show up, what did they do? They protected the fucking courthouse, which is a symbol, of law and bureaucracy and Saturn. Like, they were going to protect that. But everything else, well, they were going to let burn to the ground. And they brought out LRADs in Kenosha. First time I'd ever seen any LRADs. First time I'd seen any LRADs. And so they were, the little piercing chirps were happening with those LRADs. Anyway, so Kyle Rittenhouse shows up, and he shows up with those kids. They're basically the Wolverines, right? They were the Wolverines of Kenosha. And there's a lot of high strange around Kyle Rittenhouse with sort of the documentation of him being there. Again, those are questions that I think are pertinent in some ways. They're very pertinent. The Daily Caller kind of singled him out. And it was really the Daily Caller who was there on the scene to tend to this Joseph Rosenbaum guy, who is probably, the world is probably better off without Joseph Rosenbaum. And I'm just being straight up. And the other guys, they had their own rap sheet and their own hardcore issues. But Joseph Rosenbaum, bad news. Bad news. And that's when yesterday I did the 3-2-1, because I was going to talk about stuff that was not pretty. And if you didn't want to be part of it, that's really what I was giving you sort of the option, because it's very graphic material about what he did to 3 boys. And that's why he was in prison for the better part of 12 years. Yeah, not good. So he's gone. One of the other guys is gone. One of the other guy is, getting a bionic bicep. So these, the Kyle Rittenhouse thing to me is a bit different in some ways than these guys who are the prayer patriots. You can pray for things in other places that are less hot and troubled. Okay, you can do that. They were actually trying to protect a gas station. That's why they were there. And the gas station wasn't a convenience store. And there was another group who were up on a roof protecting another business. It's because nobody was there to protect them. And so Kyle Rittenhouse answered the call. He was there. He was part of the deal. Now you may say, well, his parents shouldn't have let him there, shouldn't let him go, whatever. Maybe his parents were, encouraging him to go. And that's a family decision. It's a family decision. And, when that happens, you tend to stay out of other people's family decisions. You may not agree with them. And sometimes it can be very egregious. That to me seemed to be on the lesser egregious scale. And I think Kyle Rittenhouse's father might actually be a cop. I'm not sure. I've heard that. I've also heard they have a business in Kenosha. So there's a lot of things that haven't been really fleshed out about Kyle. But what we do know about Kyle Rittenhouse is that the mainstream media, and even to some degree, some of the alternative media, are not allowing him to present his case, or not allowing Lynn Wood to present his case. And if you have a Discover card and you want to contribute to Kyle Rittenhouse's fund, his legal fund, guess what? They're not going to let you do that. GoFundMe would not allow the GoFundMes to be started up for Kyle Rittenhouse. Lynn Wood, who is his attorney, was banned from Twitter. And he says he's going to sue Jack Dorsey. Well, you better get ready to sue Paul Singer, because Paul Singer owns almost half of Twitter. And Paul Singer has very deep pockets, extremely deep pockets. And Paul Singer is connected to extremely powerful people in this country and in the Middle East. So when you take on Twitter, you are taking on Paul Singer. So Lynn, you got one battle to fight with Kyle Rittenhouse. And I would love for him to go in and start swinging against those guys and, make a dent in those tomato cans. But I don't know if that's possible. I don't know if it's possible. But what we've been seeing is the marginalization of, voices, whether they're, being deplatformed or whether they've been, kept from being able to have some kind of financial exchange, and to use PayPal or Venmo or Stripe. There are people who have had to resort to very unusual kinds of ways in order to take credit cards. And what happens when the credit card companies start declining people in general? It's already happened. It's happening in the Kyle Rittenhouse case. So we're entering into a really, really difficult time, because the voices and the mechanisms of conformity are really aligned now. The infidels they're inside. They are inside. They're inside the walls of the Citadel. And in order for people to really understand this, by the time they understand it, it'll be right in their face. It will be right in their face by the time they really understand it. And look what's happening in Australia. It's like pretty egregious stuff. Let me send out a tweet here, or an invite to Masaki, and let's get him on the show, because he's supposed to be here the second hour. We could talk about some of this. I also want to talk about this quantum money exchange, or this quantum economy that a lot of people are talking about as being the alternative, the swift alternative to the Rothschild banking system. So I just sent Masaki an email, and he'll be joining me here shortly. So the event horizon is upon us. It's really upon us, and that's why I've been exhorting people to act on some level, whatever it is. Right? You feel? I mean, we got Mars in Aries. If you're going to act, it's a really good time to act. You won't find a better time to act. And maybe some of us who are kind of Mars centric, and I'm not a Mars centric guy. In my draconic chart, I'm very Mars centric. So if you don't know what a draconic chart is, and I'm going to do a webinar on the draconic chart. And I've been threatening this for a while, but I'm going to do it. And it's an important chart. It is the chart of the soul. And I have found that the draconic chart is worthy. Like, there is traction with the draconic chart. And when you convert the draconic chart, your chart changes and you have an understanding like what's happening at the soul level, right? And the natal chart becomes the sort of the mechanism of the personality in some ways. And so you look at the two. You look at how the two interact. And in my draconic chart, I'm an Aries. And my midheaven is Aries. So, I have more kind of like Aries energy in my draconic chart. So I'm kind of, more Mars ruled at a soul level. Let's bring the man on right now. He's just got the earbuds in. Uh-oh.
Hey, Robert.
What's going on, brother?
Ready to rock.
What's in the beverage container today?
Just some cold brew coffee.
Cold brew coffee. All right. Is that your first cold brew coffee of the day?
Yeah, I saved it just for the show, just so I can get you stuff.
So I heard this really interesting factoid on the news the other day. It was on radio news, not like TV news. But they found that if you play a game like Tetris right after you have a cup of coffee, you get even more speeded up.
I did a mix for Emily's conspiracy cocktail. It's 180 BPM or bust. So.
Oh, man.
I listened to it afterwards. I am like, this is a little fast, so we'll see what the average person thinks.
Dude, when you're in the hill country, you got to get it into heartbeat range. You got to get it into 98 to 118.
They say about 128 house speed is the average for most people.
That's the average. So that was kind of my scene, and yeah. I would go to parties, and I knew where that like 122, 123. 124 groove was. I knew where that was. And when it went past that groove or that BPM, you could see the dance floor begin to kind of like get thinner, right?
Well, as a DJ, even though I played mostly what I like to play, you got to read the crowd. That's one of the main things, right?
So
I remember playing parties where I went in thinking, even if it was like a total underground party where I'm supposed to be playing jackhammer beats. Yeah. I remember playing parties where it was totally empty inside. I said, I got to switch it up.
Yeah.
So I drop it down just to get people kind of warmed up. And then when that room was packed, then I'd switch it. Or, it's like a real DJ has played quinceañeras, bar mitzvahs, kids at the park. I've played a lot of different things, so you got to read the room, right?
you do have to read the room. One time, because I did a little DJing, and some of it was more successful than others. Other times, for whatever reason, not always a success. But one time, I was hired to do to DJ a pagan wedding reception, and all they wanted to hear was Dead Can Dance. That's all they wanted to hear was Dead Can Dance. And I played Dead Can Dance, but I was really into like this like kind of groovy ambient space at that time. So I maybe played a little too much groovy ambient. But they definitely had their pagan playlist, and
Well,
Dead Can Dance was right at the top of it.
well, one thing that people might not know that you and I have in common is we both spent a long time in the music scene, and I worked with the music label as a fan. I was never paid, but hanging around artists and seeing a lot of parties and those kinds of things, and then knowing the background of the music, it's another area that's just as relevant as uh, politics, economics, those. And in fact, it's even more interesting, and it's come out over the years that some of your favorite personalities may come from some very interesting backgrounds. They're kind of seated in these scenes, or they may be very well versed in metaphysics and occult in their own right, like David Bowie, something like that. You know.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, David Bowie seemed to be targeted very early on, and was brought through a number of levels of initiation.
Uh-huh.
And one of the things that he did very early on was he was part of this group called the young long-haired young men's association or something like that. It got a lot of press in England. It was about guys wearing long hair, and he was kind of front and center with that group. And it was like, oh well, there's obviously somebody who's making a statement with him. And then he worked with an English mime who's Lindsay. I forget his last name now, but that guy was definitely David Bowie's handler. And he was also queer. So Bowie kind of went into queer culture, and his wife Zoe comes out of a military family.
Oh, there you go.
Hardcore military and high level, and she comes in and begins to run David Bowie. She pretty much kind of runs his career at that point. And then the other guy that plays a big role is this guy named Tony Visconti, who created this label called management arm called Main Man. That was David Bowie's management team. And Tony Visconti was, I think, probably mob. So you can see sort of the forces, beginning to constellate around David Bowie. And then his stepbrother, half brother, commits suicide. First of all, he goes crazy and winds up being institutionalized. And then he commits suicide, and he's got a song about it called Jump off of a pretty underrated album called Black Tie, White Noise. And he talks about his brother committing suicide, and his mother was batshit crazy. Like there was like weird stuff that went on in the Bowie house. Very weird stuff.
Well, I was going to ask, I just glanced at his birthday. So he's Capricorn, right?
Aquarius rising Capricorn, sun in the 12th house. So he's a very odd chart, by the way.
So does he have? Is it that Aquarius, or does he have some Gemini aspects? Because besides his alter egos, I mean, literally, his eyes were different colors because he had some accident or something.
He had an accident with one of his parents. And the Gemini aspect would always be about him changing personas.
Okay.
That was the thing that Bowie was good at, because he was really trying to dodge himself in a lot of ways. And he also thought it was a very good marketing ploy to continue to morph and take on these realities. There's that song Changes. And he says, well, I turned myself to face me and I never caught a glimpse. Right. And that's sort of Bowie in a bit of a nutshell. And even when he sort of comes clean and decides that he's going to really go straight, which he does with the Let's Dance record, you have to wonder if that's just another kind of role he's playing, because he's very preppy. Like that's kind of a preppy Bowie phase. Very clean cut, goes to Australia, loves it there, is kind of, really inspired by kind of, the outback and stuff like that. And
I was just thinking, right? Because his wife is Iman, right?
Oh, Iman, like Iman. Iman.
Well, what's interesting is I had met online because I also used to have a podcast and YouTube show. It didn't run that long. It was like maybe 15 episodes at most. But I interviewed a lot of so-called My Lab, the MK Ultra Project people.
Right.
So I got Lilith and Gemini, Robert. So maybe that wasn't the smartest because I started to draw a lot of MKs, right? It's like I shut it down. I'm like, this is getting too much. But what's interesting is there was one young woman who, because I'm bringing this up because of the Iman thing, she was the same basically. I don't know how it works. A tribal in Africa, right? So she was the same family basically as Iman. Very elegant features, right? She's a black African. MK Ultra, this girl. She went to Columbia.
Yeah.
She was MK'd by Clinton people.
Yeah.
But get this, Robert. This is also factors into what's happening now. She was an MK, but she was a right-wing MK. During the 2016 election, she was alt-right Somali on Twitter.
Wow.
And she was a Trumper. She was a Trumper. So they got MKs on both sides. This whole thing is this Gemini phase we're in. You got agents, you got mind controls, like influencing it, and they're not necessarily totally aware of what they're doing.
No, they're not. They're not. Who else was accused of that? Stacey Dash, Damon Dash's sister.
Oh yeah, she's a prominent black quote unquote conservative. She's also bat-ish crazy, right?
Right, and then Damon Dash was Jay-Z's partner in Rockefeller, and then there's all like the sacrifice stories that go along with those guys, and apparently, his sacrifice was Lisa Left Eye Lopes, who was his girlfriend.
Right.
So yeah, but Stacey Dash kind of has that kind of. Well,
Stacey Dash, she linked up with some high-powered Jewish lawyer, I think in Florida, a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
And I don't think this lawyer was ready because he called the cops because she was beating his ass. They had gotten married, and like within a month, it was like, oh, this is what I got into.
Yeah, man, she would be a handful, dude. She would just be a handful. Well, look, I popped up Bowie's chart, and the Gemini stuff is right there.
Okay,
right?
There you go.
There's the true node in Gemini, Uranus in Gemini.
There you go.
And the fourth house. So again, when people, knew the Bowie family and talked about what it was like to go over there, they said it was a crazy house and very, very unstable, and probably helping Bowie sort of disassociate and create these multitude of characters.
Well, maybe David Bowie's was part of Her Majesty's Secret Service. And when they talk about the British invasion, maybe it was more than just a cultural thing, because you had kind of both sides at that time, the Laurel Canyon types versus like the UK types that were battling for the cultural supremacy of how to push the culture.
Well, it's Tavistock and CIA. I mean, that's who was basically running the 60s, Tavistock and the CIA. And sometimes I think they worked together, and sometimes I think that they kind of had their own programs, because the crossover and the bleed through between the Rolling Stones and the Beatles and Laurel Canyon is very valid and clear. I mean, it was there. And and one of the guys that's quite interesting in that regard is Harry Nilsson, because Harry Nilsson was he was a kind of a troubled guy, and like a lot of people were during that period, but a very good singer-songwriter, and was actually pretty well liked, and he was never known for being like an enfant terrible, right? He goes to England. He's been summoned by Brian Epstein and the Beatles. He goes to England and he meets with the Beatles, and when he comes back, he's like a different person. And he fires his manager, and he goes off on a very, very creative spree, but he's a lot less like the kind of the very likable, Harry Nilsson, Tin Pan Alley sort of guy. So he's like a bridge in some ways between both of those worlds, and his life later on when we get into the 70s, like the late 60s and early 70s, early mid 70s, he and John Lennon were just notorious for just getting, shit faced. And Harry Nilsson would take off and people would not see him for, a week, 10 days, 2 weeks. And Lennon was often a part of these Nilsson escapades. And they would get thrown out of clubs together. And then, of course, whatever happens to Lennon happens to Lennon. And then Harry Nilsson just becomes like obsessed and possessed with gun control at that point. I don't think he's around anymore. Great singer-songwriter, but definitely a personality split when he comes back from England. So here's Bowie's chart. We've got a lot of Leo here, right? So Leo's seventh house. And the seventh house is where you have your relationships, right? So if you're in a relationship with somebody, whether it's a marriage or a partnership or a business relationship, right, the seventh house is going to be a key signifier. And what do we have here? We got that Saturn-Pluto conjunction in Leo, Moon in Leo, right? Here's the part of fortune. So those are all fixed planets. And so he would constantly hanging out with people or having partnerships with people that would be often intense and or controlling. See that? Right there.
Well, his LA period was off the rails, but one of the things, among the many things that were going on, I'm born and grown in LA, so you're around a lot of this stuff where you hear things, or literally I heard stuff on air on
KRQ
FM, Rodney Bingenheimer.
Rodney and David had a very interesting relationship. Keep going.
Well, Rodney Bingenheimer, he's a sort of nebbish little mod kind of guy.
They called him the mayor of Sunset Strip. That was his unofficial title.
Right. So the guy's probably like 4'11" or something. He's a million years old. I think his show just got canceled recently. So he had a Sunday show where he would break bands, but he was breaking bands, significant bands, until like probably the early 2000s or something, because his primetime era was like the 70s, basically.
Yeah, but he had a little club called the English Club, and it was really nothing more than a bit of a space in a strip mall or something. And that's where everybody from like Iggy Pop to Susie and the Banshees,
T-Rex,
they would all come over and play his English Club, and that's where the famous groupies out of LA, Pamela Day Bear and her group would go and hang out.
So again, whenever you get to these areas, long before QAnon existed, Rodney Bingenheimer, he was getting in with these bands, not just because he was such a cool guy setting up a space for them to meet, but like you said, these quote unquote groupies were underage. They were like, who knows, 13,
14 years old. Yeah. You have people in, Joan Jett, Lita Ford, the Curry sisters. And the guy that was really behind that was what's his name? Kim Fowley. And I don't know if you've ever paid any attention to Kim Fowley. That guy is very dark. And he was the guy that basically started the Runaways.
Yep.
With Joan Jett.
Yeah, right.
Kim Fowley is a very dark character. And that guy was a fixer for, Pamela Day Bear and Lori, what's her name, who wound up hanging out with Jimmy Page a lot. And that scene was really big in LA. And he was a guy that was kind of involved in, procuring these young girls for a lot of these, not just English rock stars, but American rock stars as well. And it was a time where, it was like, oh yeah, it's okay. They're young and, it's cool. It's a scene. But looking back at it now, it's like, if we had that happening now, there would be a huge hue and cry. And, I think with some real merit around that, but it was just a very, very different kind of laissez-faire time. But Rodney was in the mix. I mean, Rodney provided the space. He provided the space.
I think he probably promotes or plays up his, he's just a small little old man. And I'm just a music nerd. And meanwhile, he probably knew how to crack that whip behind the scenes because he's been. Why does this guy have a Sunday show for like 20, 30 years or something?
Well,
Why does he have that slot?
yeah. Well, I think the major labels were very invested in him as well.
Yeah.
Because they had no other real place in that area to break and market that
Right.
kind of music. So, could there have been nefarious kinds of reasons why he was allowed to continue to have that show for such a long time? I also think that there was also it was also, I think, quite popular. I think a lot of people listened to his show.
Yep.
So when you have ratings and when you have the major labels behind you, it's easy, I think, to like stay in the game. So,
well, Robert, even though Hollywood's on its way out, back in the days, as long as you produced the results and you brought the money in, you could do anything. So,
well, it was more of a meritocracy in a lot of ways.
Right.
It might have been a dirty meritocracy. I want to talk about this before I do. Bowie's Venus. I want to get out of this chart, but Bowie's Venus is at 2 Sagittarius, and it put it almost right on my ascendant. And I interviewed him, right? You know that, right?
Right, and then you had that premonition. So
yeah, it wasn't even a premonition. I had an event that happened before the Bowie interview where somebody gave me some inside information around him. And which I sprung on him when I interviewed him. But that Venus on my ascendant, I think, was pretty valid because I had a really interesting connect. Like, I could tell that we liked each other, right? Like, we got on well. And, I don't know if I could have had David Bowie for a lifelong friend. I'm not sure anybody could. He was very, very detached, very detached. You never really knew what was going on with him with all that, that 12th house stuff. And then there was that cool veneer of the Aquarian ascendant. But, in that moment, for that, that hour that I was hanging out with him, it was like we were having a conversation like, two friends. And, I don't know if he was like that with other journalists, but it felt very familiar. And, with his Venus on my ascendant, I think it was kind of, apropos in a lot of ways.
Well, you know what else I noticed? His last album, Black Star, released on his birthday, and it was in 2016, right in the election year.
Yeah,
Black Star, obviously Saturn, and there's a book you probably seen it. It's Dark Star Rising, Power and Magic in the Era of Trump.
Yeah, yeah.
So, literally, Black Star was it was kind of overlapping with the chaos magic that was kicking up that would eventually elect Trump. So
well, sure, absolutely. There's a really interesting. Bowie does a cover of a song called "I'm a Gemini Spaceship," which is, and I never made that connection between that song. It's actually a really fun song with Bowie and his True Node. Debisu was bringing something up in the chat, and she says, "Wasn't Howie Klein SF trying to repeat Kim Fowley and Rodney? He sent me a friend request yesterday." So Howie Klein was a major punk rock scenester and kind of insider in San Francisco. Like when Bruce Springsteen came to town, Howie Klein was his chauffeur. Howie Klein had a local radio show on a station called KUSF in San Francisco. And he was sort of a version of Ronnie Bingenheimer, but Howie Klein was way more of a hustler. Way more of a hustler. And Howie Klein actually wound up starting his own label called 415 Records, which was a sub-label of, I think it was Columbia. And one night I was hanging out with my girlfriend and her brother and I think his girlfriend. They were all older than me. I wasn't even 21. My girlfriend was older than me. So they wanted to go into this club called the City Disco, and they were just starting to play like new wave music and dance punk, and I couldn't get in because I was underage. But I saw, and I think it was kind of shit faced, but I saw Howie Klein outside of the club, and I said, "Hey, Howie," I said, and he didn't really know me. I would say hi to him at Aquarius Records, which is where,
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
which is where he works sometimes. And so I chat with him and stuff. I said, "Hey, Howie," I said, I'm 18 and my girlfriend's in there with her brother and his girlfriend. I can't get in there. Can you get me in? And he did. He basically walked me through the kitchen and, got me into the club. And so if you were into punk or new wave, like that was the guy in San Francisco, but he was way more ambitious than Rodney Bingenheimer, way, way more ambitious. Mm-hmm. And eventually I think he started to do A&R for Columbia Records. We might be boring the shit out of people with all this music talk, but I think it's interesting because it's an era that's like, it's not with us anymore.
The thing is that it's such a cultural mover, music and arts. It's subconscious. It in a lot of ways, the pop culture is the new religion, right? Because as time got further and further on to our time, people stopped going to church or temple, and the thing that they focused most of their attention on was like the pop stars, And
are you talking about now? Are you talking about currently?
Well,
in general,
as time went on post World War II, they got.
Absolutely. Oh, absolutely. The live concert replaced Sunday service. The live concert was the Pentecostal for the new youth.
Yeah, and then a lot of these, you have your nodal points, which could be like radio stations and so forth that could turn the culture or make somebody pop. Like Rodney Bingenheimer could put somebody on, and from K-Rock in LA, then the other stations across the country. So you'd probably have a place in New York, a place in LA, somewhere maybe in Chicago. You only needed to control those stations to make something happen. And then, because this is like pre-internet era. So,
yeah. So to your point, because I used to be actually in on the record side of things. And there were a number of independent distributors around the country during that time.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say, for instance, you had a band and you wanted to break them in the Pacific Northwest. So what you would do is you would just work on a specific region, and you would work with the distributors in that region. You would work with the record stores in that region. You would work with the radio stations in that region.
Promo copies to the DJs.
You all that stuff. You would do all those things, and then what would happen is you would try to get traction in a small area of the country, and very different areas were engaged in the promotion of different kinds of music. There, like if you went into the South, they had this thing called the Chitlin Circuit, and the Chitlin Circuit was set up with, clubs in places like Memphis or Biloxi, and they have very specific kinds of distributors and radio for that genre and that area. And eventually, what happened was all those independent distributors got bought up, and they got everything in the Clinton era began to get essentially, corporatized. And then it became very, very difficult to go in and spend regional money, because now you had to get involved in national campaigns. You couldn't just do it the way it had been done before. Like you could saturate an area with records, and you didn't necessarily have to do it in another part of the country.
Well, every era has its flavor, and I caught the tail. I was probably the last to see the physical media distribution, because I was there. The label I was working with, they had a record label and a store, and it was like the early 2000s when the digital DJing started coming in. So vinyl copies would just start to tank, because you could basically either get it for free or like 99 cents, maybe like $2 at most, a song. Whereas like a physical media, like vinyl, you're going to be paying at least $10 at least. If it's an import now, it's probably like $20 for one single, So
right.
The choice was basically obvious, but I saw that and also a lot of independent artists they could make major money as an independent artist if you had your niche. Because I
Mhm.
know DJs that were paying their rent and the car insurance with mixtapes in the 90s. With mixtapes,
Sure.
you know?
Absolutely. And there's that guy, Mike Watt, who came out of the Minutemen
Mhm.
and an LA band, famous LA, and their songs are like a minute long, right? I mean, that was their thing.
Yeah.
And then he started a group called Firehose, and he was always like, preaching the DIY ethic. Like, how do you create a studio?
Right.
How do you tour? And like, how do you lay out your van? How do you set up a tour? And he was always like kind of on that tip. And if you could do that during that time, and again, keep the cost down, it was all about scalability, and you could make money. It wasn't, it wasn't that.
So
It was challenging because you had to work hard, but the opportunity was there if you could do it.
so now it's moved on because street cred kind of went out in the 90s. So now it's TikTok, or like you're a YouTuber. That's kind of what it moved. Like, the old hustle was like, yeah, gonna put a group together, gonna do some hip hop DIY. We're gonna do this tour. That hustle is long gone. People try to do like streetwear, that kind of thing, and now it's I'm a TikToker or something.
So I don't know why YouTube did this, but one morning, they decided that they were going to. Oh, I know why. I know why. Because there's a guy that lives in this town. One of the few people that live in this town, and he's I think he's around 28 years old, maybe. And I met him. He used to be like the beer tender at this place that I used to go to. And his name is Joaquin, and I really like this kid. He's smart, he's funny, and he writes rhymes, and he goes by Worm. That's his nickname, Worm. He doesn't mind it. He doesn't mind being called Worm. So he would show me his rhymes, and I'm like, dude. And he actually played me a few things. I'm like, man, this is actually really good. Like, you should continue to do this. So one night I was sending him some stuff, like old school stuff. Like, I sent him some video of the Scratch Pickles. Like, check these guys out, man. They're really good. And then I sent him a video of Kid Koala. He checked this guy out. Was really good. And so, YouTube all of a sudden thought that I really liked hip hop. I'm like, well, that was part of my world for a while. I was 40 years old, but I wasn't really, I wouldn't fit into it, but I was in the business. So I had kind of a pass in that world some ways. But now they thought I liked hip hop. So they started to give me all this like contemporary hip hop content. So I decided, well, let me listen to this.
Robert's checking out Cardi B.
This is beyond Cardi B. Beyond Cardi B. And so I should do, like how they have the like the young brothers who listen to something for the very first time.
Oh, the reaction videos.
Yeah, I should do one for like the new hip hop stuff. It would not be pretty. I'm going to tell you, it would not be pretty, because I heard some of this stuff for the very first time, and it was some of the most aggressive, sensory assaulting music I've ever heard.
Well,
and you and I have talked about Merzbow and the whole Japanese
noise, the Japanese noise. There's German and Japanese noise band.
Right. And which is very, if you haven't looked at Merzbow, listen to about 10 seconds. That's about all. And I worked for a record company, a distribution company, where we had to sell that stuff. Like, we'd have to get on to mom and pops and, hey, have you heard the new Merzbow? It's really fucking great. Make your ears bleed. But this modern hip hop stuff is as equally as assaulting, but in a different kind of way.
You know what I noticed? This is just a cursory experience, but sometimes I'll just flip on the radio in the car just to check out what's on. And I had to turn it off because some of these so-called hip hop is the mumble rap, rap songs.
Yeah.
It wasn't really the lyrics, but there was definitely, to me, there was some kind of like tones in the bass.
Dude, you know what I'm talking about. You know what I'm talking about.
It's not quite hypnotizing, but it kind of like just pushes you out of your comfort zone.
It's orienting. It's disorienting.
Yeah.
Now think about listening to that music, high as
Yeah.
fuck. Okay.
Oh yeah. Well,
Think of that. And think about maybe you're like an 11-year-old kid
right.
listening to that music.
Well,
And you're high as fuck.
well,
What
Robert,
does that do to their brains?
You've broken this down astrologically, but I've talked to some younger folks, and I told them the difference between my generation, which is I'm in my early 40s, and you guys is the 90s. Coming up in the 90s, we were the generation that were selling drugs, but the young kids, y'all are crackheads. You guys are just doing the drugs. And the 90s was about the hustle, right? Then DIY, the hustle, however you did it, whether it was music, flipping mixtapes, selling dope. But the young kids, they're just total Neptunians, and they're just like tuned out and listening to these droning mumble rap songs, So
Yeah, I mean, I try to be open to music in general, like like again, like late '90s, early 2000s. The backpacker hip hop scene, which conscious hip hop. All I mean, I liked a lot of that stuff. It was pretty cool stuff. And of course, crossover with Del the Funky Homo Sapien and Gorillaz. I mean, that stuff was really cool. But this stuff, wow. I mean, and they usually set music up so that the older generation can't hear it. I mean, that's part of the thing, right? They want to make it so abrasive that you want nothing to do with that. Nothing to do. But it was like, if you were an adult, like back in the, I don't know, early 60s, like 64, and you were listening to Hermits, which was supposed to be like youth music, like, you could listen and go, oh, wow, kind of couple of little,
Well, remember Chaz Chop?
Yeah.
Chaz Chop was at Seattle, and then the head guy was a rapper, right? Was it Raz? Was ever his name?
Yeah. Raz X.
There you go. He I don't know if you saw this, but there was a little note that said he had a music studio funded by the city of Seattle.
Oh yeah, I covered that.
That it was like $80,000 for this random.
Not just the music studio, but he had an internet cafe.
Okay.
That was given a grant too, because it was like, how did he get all this shit? So he is connected. He's also, by the way, he's also been to Dubai.
Oh, there you go.
So Raz Chaz has he has Muslim bucks behind him.
Mm-hmm.
And it may not be, he's got Muslim bucks. And then if you follow that path, then you have to think or ask yourself, well, gee, I wonder how many Muslim bucks are being kind of spent in these various cities in terms of these operations, through, and again, I'm not an Islamophobe. I really don't have a problem with Islamic people. A lot of the people that are Muslims that I met have been really cool people, very quiet, very peaceful, just want to, do their own thing. Right. And just like any group, there's an extreme side to that group.
Mm-hmm.
So we have the Muslim Brotherhood set up by MI6, by the way. And then you have the other groups, Akaida. Again, those are all proxy groups that were set up by intelligence agencies.
Well, what comes to mind when you were talking about the music is you've probably seen this YouTube series, They Sold Their Souls to Rock and Roll. You ever seen that?
I think so, yeah.
It was part of the satanic panic wave in the 80s where people are like, oh, it's the heavy metal. It's so demonic. A lot of people laughed it off. But let me tell you, people out there haven't seen this. Go look it up. It's called They Sold Their Souls to Rock and Roll. The host is some pastor that's like very born again. But it's a great resource for all the original source clips of it's mainly rock, although they had a later edition that covered hip hop. But it's very interesting because if you've ever known artists or musicians, a lot of times the personality and what comes out of them are two different things. They're pulling from a place that they don't consciously usually understand, right? And when you look at these clips of like Black Sabbath and Ozzy,
they're literally saying out loud, it's like, oh, we don't know how we wrote those. The songs wrote themselves. We were just like out of our mind on drugs and automatic writing, and like spirits were coming in and having dark premonitions. But it's like band after band after band after band. And after a while, I'm no Christian, but you see enough of that stuff and you consider this is what the background of people's lives. That's a little concerning.
Well,
right?
Led Zeppelin talks about it, and they talk about being taken out to the woodshed.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I think that's code for being taken out and, being really roughed up by forces that they've summoned. That's what I think the reference is. Hammer of the Gods by Timothy White, which is a pretty good biography of Led Zeppelin, kind of gets into some of that stuff. And it's a good read. And again, it talks about, their time in LA and, hanging out with, all those teeny boppers as part of this. I think it was the Hyatt House, the Hyatt in LA. That's where everything sort of went down. That Bowie period in LA was, for him, like extremely dark. And Ralph in chat brought up The Man Who Fell to Earth. And now The Man Who Fell to Earth, he plays this guy, Thomas Newton. Right. And it's really the story of like a fallen angel, that he becomes this sort of Luciferian character.
He's a brother from another planet.
He's a Luciferian character, but there's some interesting themes in the movie. And one of the themes that he brings this technology to the planet. Mm-hmm. And it happens very, very quickly. Like he's able to bring these new inventions into society very quickly. But then these people come and pay a visit to the guy who's helping him run his company, played by Buck Henry. Mm-hmm. And I think it's Bernie Casey, the ex-football player. And he basically says, you got to stop this. You cannot keep putting these inventions out. You're outpacing the social economy.
Well, one of the things that Bowie was famous for, probably especially during his LA period when he was doing medical grade cocaine.
Oh, yeah.
He had the cut and paste method. Like people are like, how do you make your songs? And he would basically have words, just cut them into squares. Yeah. Probably out of his mind on drugs, reading Crowley grimoires on the side, right?
Yep.
And then he would cut and paste, and then he would just be. It's a kind of a channeling where like he would arrange the words, and then it would come out to like classic Bowie songs, right?
Yeah. He and Eno did that. It's called chance composition.
Yeah.
And they would do stuff like they put things on a board, and they would take a pointer and do stuff like this. And they would do it with notes. They would do it with words. So they were very into the whole chance composition thing. And it's really interesting. He recorded Station to Station during that time. Mm-hmm. And if you listen to the song Station to Station is all about alchemical magic. Mm-hmm. And Station to Station is it's a theme, right? And it's an esoteric theme. And he talks about Kether to Malkuth. Mm-hmm. And he talks about I'm lost in my circle. Well, really, what kind of circle, David? I'm lost in my circle. Vision drowning sound. And he's talking about really an esoteric rite, station to station, going from one state to another. And Earl Slick, who was the guitarist for those sessions, he said that there was so much cocaine during those sessions that he doesn't even remember recording the album. He has no memory of recording that album.
Well, Bowie was also paranoid that witches were going to steal his semen. So there was a lot going through his mind at that time.
Well, that was part of the story of him when I interviewed him, because he was working on this movie called Neutron with this guy Derek Jarman. Mm-hmm. And I'd met this guy who knew Derek Jarman, and we hung out a couple times. A very interesting guy, an English guy. Mm-hmm. And he told me that he used to go over to Derek Jarman's. And Derek Jarman was a very, very weird guy. I mean, he's very eccentric, English artist, and he had like all kind of a loft. There were no walls in his place. Like there were no walls.
Mm-hmm.
And the bathroom was right in the center of his living space. So if you had to take a crap or use the head, it was right there. And there was no curtain, right? That's how like odd Derek Jarman was. And he did a movie called Jubilee with Adam Ant. It's about time travel. Anyway, so Jarman and Bowie were hanging out, and Bowie was working on this movie called Neutron. And it was set in the future, and it was about a fascistic society in the future. And Bowie, there was a part of Bowie that liked fascism. Like
yeah, the thin white Duke.
He loved the fashion of fascism, the sharp coats and everything. He loved that shit, right? So it was about a future society that was based on fascism. So one day he left a pack of his cigarettes there, Marlboro Lights, and Derek Jarman started calling his friends. Oh, guess what? Bowie left his cigarettes here. No. Somehow that got back to Bowie. And Bowie called up Derek Jarman. He says, Derek, I'm no longer doing your film, and I want my cigarettes back. Because he thought that Jarman could practice sympathetic magic on him.
Well, Robert, I work with radionics, and the rules of voodoo basically apply to radionics, because radionics is just basically magic with technical devices. So all you need is the intention or the influence, and you need a target. And a lot of times what do they do in voodoo? They take some personal item of the person to get that signature, right? And Freeman Flies talked about this, that apparently Madonna has a cleanup crew, a DNA cleanup crew.
Yeah,
so she never leaves any napkins, anything that would have her saliva, anything. It's all like wiped before they leave the restaurant or something.
Well, she knows, right? She knows what goes on. Yeah. So I actually brought that up in the interview with Bowie. And he, when I was there waiting for him, he walked in and he pranked me. He was wearing fake teeth and they were busted. and he walked over to the table like he was a freaking zombie. And I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know what was happening. I'm like, okay, well, I guess I'll, just soldier through this thing. And then he sat down at the table and he was just staring off into space. And I'm like, okay. Yeah, I shook his hand. And I'm like, okay. And then he slammed his hand down on the table and he pulled out his fake teeth and he said, unflappable. I like that. And it was like, he was just totally fucking with me, which was fine. I guess I passed the test. But later in the interview, and he was actually a bit of a prankster. Like, I don't know if he was trying too hard or not, but at one point during the interview, the phone kept ringing in the boardroom. And this was Virgin Records. So this is Richard Branson's boardroom. Like I sat in Richard Branson's boardroom. Okay. So he goes over to the phone, ringing in the boardroom. He said, should I? I said, yeah, go answer it. So he goes over there and he picks up the phone and he thought it was really cute by answering EMI, which is wasn't the label, right?
Well, isn't that Gemini Energy?
EMI, and he thought it was a gas. And so then he sat down. We were talking about movies. We talked about Velvet Goldmine. We talked about maybe a cinematic version of Ziggy Stardust. He had this grand vision of doing Ziggy Stardust across all these platforms. Like he wanted to do Ziggy Stardust as a video game. He wanted to do Ziggy Stardust on Broadway. He wanted to do Ziggy Stardust as a movie. He wanted to do them all at the same time. And I said, well, that's cool. Well, there's another movie I want to ask you about. And he said, what's that? I said, well, there was this movie that you were supposed to do with Derek Jarman called Neutron. I'm like, whatever happened to that movie? And he said, oh, God, yes. Oh, right. Well, that was such a fantastic storyboard. And Derek was
the cigarettes, though. This is the cigarettes.
Derek was such a great stylist. It was really just a fantastic looking film, but there just wasn't the money. The money wasn't there. I said, well, so that question I want to ask you about that movie. I said, so there's a rumor that you left your Marlboro cigarettes over there, and you called him up and you wanted them back, and then you told him that. Oh, but then he said to me, he said, by the way, how do you know about that? Not many people know about that.
Because Robert does his homework.
And I'm like, okay, just wait,
Uh-huh.
David. Here it comes. I said, well, there's another part of that story I want to ask you about. So then I asked him about the cigarettes. You should have seen the look on his face. It was like, oh, you'd seen a fucking ghost. I swear to God. Like he was speechless. And it was uncomfortable. It was very uncomfortable for a moment. I'm like, Jesus Christ. I've just like,
well, you know what?
I just like hit this guy with an elephant gun. So I gave him an out. I had to give him an out.
Uh-huh.
I said, urban legend? He says, oh, God, yes. Urban legend. Like, okay. But yeah, he that's exactly what he did. He didn't want those cigarettes around.
Well, being grown and born in LA, I'm still here. I need to get out before 2024, right, Robert? But I have seen some stuff, man. I have seen some stuff, and there's a famous, I won't name the name, but it should be pretty obvious. There's a famous show that had a female tattoo artist.
Oh, yeah.
And I went to one of their parties.
Yeah.
That was like a vampire party.
Oh.
And my buddy's Brazilian, and his wife was like number 2 in the shop, right under Cat, right? And I think it was funded by, I don't know if that was on MTV or whatever, but they had a party. It was a big one. And Lemmy from Motorhead was there. Everybody's like in black. Everything was kind of painted black. It was like a vampire party.
Lemmy was a very dark character.
Yeah, so it was just interesting because when you go to some of these Hollywood parties, it's weird because sometimes at the time you're there, there's so many sensory inputs. There's a lot going on. So at the moment, you might not realize what's going on. But I think back, I was at a Grammys after party once. Mm-hmm. I have like this Forrest Gump thing where I'll end up at places for whatever reason.
Yep.
I didn't even want to go to this Grammys after party. And then I start noticing, like, there's Steve Aoki, there's that guy, there's Skrillex, like, what's going on, right? And then, like, 2 hours into it, I realize I'm at a Grammys after party. But afterwards, I think about the faces and the reactions to me, and I feel like I was in Jacob's Ladder. Like, it's like
I know exactly what you're talking about.
The older I get, Robert, and I'm not that old, but having seen enough, and I spent at least 10 years pretty much every week in the underworld, because the clubs and nightlife is underworld, basically. And I'm a Scorpio sun, right?
Yeah.
When you're young, you're just excited to be places, to learn, to experience, right? But the older I get, I think about the places I've been and some of these Hollywood, parties. And like I said, it's like Jacob's Ladder, because I'm realizing that these people are demonic.
Well,
yeah.
I mean, my story is Northern California, San Francisco, East Bay, but every now and then I would wind up in LA. And one night I had dinner with Love and Rockets.
Okay.
And it was at a restaurant in, I've told this story before, but you're here, you haven't heard it. And so it was at a pretty good restaurant in Hollywood. And so it was me and David and Kevin, and then Daniel Ash and their publicist. And, the one thing that I had in common with them is that David and Kevin were both very esoteric, and they're very into the occult. Mm-hmm. And at that, they were pretty much, Crowleyites, and they talked about how the band played with the I Ching and stuff. And, and they got into a big hassle at Rick Rubin's place with Genesis P-Orage. And that was a heavy deal, because, that was whatchamacallit's old house. That was Harry Houdini's old house.
Oh.
So Genesis was staying in the guest room, like a guest cottage. And, Love and Rockets and Rick Rubin were in the main house. And I don't know what Genesis was up to, but the place caught on fire.
Well, let me just make a side note. People that have never heard of Genesis P-Orage, put that in your search browser. Let's look up Genesis P. Orch.
Yeah.
You're gonna see a very interesting individual.
I met Genesis one time, and it was like,
well, you know,
and he's dead now. He died.
oh yeah. Well, if you want to see a physical representation of the Baphomet, you're gonna see that in Genesis P. Orch, because he transformed his body. But he also mentored some of the people that are on the esoteric talk circuit right now that are doing classes about magic and
well, that was psychic TV, Throbbing Gristle. I mean, they would do stuff like during the psychic TV days. They would have these parties, and they would send out these invites, and if you were going to go to the party, you either had to put vaginal fluid, semen, or blood on the RSVP.
Mm-hmm.
That was it. Like, that was your entrance to the party. So what were they doing with those RSVPs, right? I mean, so very deeply occult background, and he essentially got kicked out of England because they found a bunch of stuff on his hard drive that was very compromising. And a friend of mine, I'm not going to mention his name, wound up eventually dating his ex-wife and kind of getting an inside scoop on that whole scene. And he says it wasn't as real as the authorities claimed it to be. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know if that's the case or not, but that's why he never went back to England. And then he shows up in, of all places, I think Sebastopol. And right around the same time, that's where Terence McKenna is living. That's also where Michael Horowitz, who was Winona Ryder's father, and Winona Ryder, I think, she was older at that time. But they were all living there. I mean, I don't think they actually did anything together, but that's really odd that all three of those characters, and Michael Horowitz being the keeper of Tim Leary's entire library. And Tim Leary being in this very kind of Crowley-esque sort of
that's what I was gonna say. Yeah.
Thing, and it's just weird. How the universe constellates itself sometimes.
Well,
but I met him, and he creeped me out. But I want to get back to this Love and Rockets thing, because this actually gets back to what you were talking about with the Baphomet thing. Because what happens is he gets caught in this fire inside of the guest house, and he apparently has to go out on a window, and he's on like the drain, coming off of the roof, and that collapsed, and he fell, and like he punctured his spleen and broke. Anyway, so he winds up suing Rick Rubin, and he winds up suing every member of Love and Rockets, every member. So each one of them had to get a lawyer, right? And he won. He won that suit, and he got, 6 figures plus. And that's when he started to modify his body. It was that fire settlement where he decided he and another woman were going to merge together and become one physical being, right? That's what happened. So he put on this, and then she put on that. And so they became like one entity, which is what you're talking about. And it all came out of that whole thing at Rick Rubin's place.
Well, LA is a very Neptunian place. So you're going to see a lot of strength. It's a portal. You got to know California as a whole may be a portal, but LA.
Oh, dude.
There's some strange things.
Very strange.
Let me tell you, because now some of these things I did not see myself, but I directly know the person that saw it. So it's like 1 degree of separation, right?
Sure.
I remember hearing, I have so many stories, but a lot of stuff in the Hollywood Hills, a lot of odd things. So I remember there was this guy from the rave scene, and he did some kind of delivery. I don't know what it was, but he would go drop things off, deliver things to houses. So he said, like, man, I got to tell you this story because I know you're into this weird stuff, right? So I said, yeah. He said, I did a delivery in the hills, in the Hollywood Hills, and he pulls up, ding dong, the door opens, and he goes, they were old, but they were young. I said, what does that mean? He goes, there was 3 guys. He opens the door. There's 3 guys. They all look the same. They have like a, either look totally the same or very similar face. They had kind of longish hair, but it was white. So the face looked young,
Right.
but they had like white hair. And they just said, all 3 of them were like, thank you. Took the whatever he was delivering and the door closed. He goes, what did I just see? They were like,
they were like Christopher Lee in Lord of the Rings, right? That's what they look like.
Yeah, except the face was like young. And basically he's like, were they like tall whites, those ETs, the tall whites?
Yeah.
And I was like, hey, if I was an ET, I would be living in the Hollywood Hills too.
Yeah, right. What a place to hang out. So after that dinner with Love and Rockets, I peeled off with Daniel Ash. I've told this story before. But I peeled off with Daniel Ash, and we go to this club. Okay.
Yeah.
And it's one of those like weirdly synchronistic, like David Lynchian kind of moments.
Mm-hmm.
And we walk into the club, and Daniel walks in, and I'm right behind him, and Ball of Confusion by Love and Rockets is playing. Like, are you kidding me? Like, you can't script this shit. Like, and the place is going off. It's just going off, and there's strobes, and and here I am. I'm walking into the club with the guy who's singing the damn tune, right? And then we go up to the bar and we hang out. And he buys a bottle of wine. He brought this gal with him. He had just come back from Big Sur and Essalon on a motorcycle ride. Okay, so he's with this gal, and they weren't really kind of boyfriend girlfriend, but I guess they were buddies, motorbike buddies for the weekend. So I'm standing there, he's standing there, and I'm talking to him, and she's there, and then this brother walks up, and he's got like a leather jacket. He's got one of those kind of nylon kind of stocking caps around his head. And it's obvious that the woman and this guy know each other. And she introduces him to David. And then I'm talking, and then I watch as she takes the back of her hand, just go right across his crotch, like right there at the bar. Right. I'm like, oh, well, that was very familiar. It was very, very like crazy sort of odd stuff. And I'm like, did he notice that? And did he even care if he noticed that? Right. It was just like kind of you're right. I found myself in the middle of like this freaking David Lynch movie with this whole scene. And it was very odd, and that's mild. Like that's completely mild compared to like a lot of other people.
Well, before the world changed, Robert, in the 2019 and before world, I would go to a lot of parties. Oh, not different ones, but I would go to like the drum bass parties here in LA. More as my mindset was always more kind of like industry, because I never, I enjoy the music, but I actually came from the back end. I didn't get into the music from parties. I came from the office, and from the office, I don't know if you remember Giant Robot magazine. It was the Asian pop culture.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I was one of the early interns. So I helped blow that magazine. There was a zine, but it turned into magazine. Blew up, but they had an office with a rave promotion. So when I would be in the office in the mid 90s, I'd be hearing all this weird stuff, and I'm like, oh, okay, I like that style. That one I'm not so much into. And right. So it was an influence, because now it's totally different with the internet. But before, if you wanted to hear out there fringe music, you had to seek it out, or you had to know somebody to even hear it, because this kind of music was not easily available. You would have to have a mixtape or have the vinyl or the CD. Yeah. It was not being played on radio, and a lot of times, you couldn't even find it if there was on the internet. It was just, the culture was totally different. So I got to experience that by, you have like your tribal groups, and you contact people and you start finding things out about that. But I I've seen some stuff, any underground scene, but I brought that up because talking about how strange LA is. I remember talking to a DJ producer from Miami who came here, and we've had, he told us, and so Miami, they party to the break of dawn.
I used to go to Winter Music Conference every year for about 3 years, and I survived all 3 years.
They're no stranger to drugs, but this guy told me, as a seasoned party person, okay, what he said is, what you guys accept as normal here in LA would not be acceptable in Miami. And he was talking about, now this is a drum-based jungle party, but we had some trans people, but nobody blinks an eye. He goes, dude, what's going on here? I'm like, I don't know. They're just here. He goes, you guys in LA or something, because this would not, people would turn their heads in Miami. He said for his scene, in the rave scene, but in LA, basically, you could look like a full-on alien. You could be Genesis P. Orge, and people, they don't notice. Yeah. So this is where I grew up in, seeing underground stuff here in LA.
Did you ever run across a label called Emperor Norton?
No.
So that was a label that was run by Gordon Getty's son.
Oh, really?
And I kind of knew that label a little bit. I knew their A&R guy. So I went to one of their parties. That guy King Britt, you know that guy, the DJ King Britt?
Oh yeah.
So King Britt DJ'd there, and it was a pretty cool party. But I hung out with Gordon Getty's son, who ran that label. Wow, he was really not very grounded. Not very grounded. Like like almost like unable to carry in a conversation. Like maybe he had, I was on the spectrum or something, but it's like that. That was an interesting kind of moment to, deal with somebody who is, the son of a major power family, and a grandson of, J. Paul Getty.
Well, that's one thing. It could happen in San Francisco, New York, but LA is not more the mainstream parties, but there'll be smaller so-called underground scenes. You'll see people from Hollywood,
I remember. Oh yeah, for sure.
I remember because I started out listening to more like band, like indie punk stuff, and there was a club called Jabberjaw and Pico. They had like Nirvana there before, like Bleach before Nevermind. They had a lot of bands from the Bay. I think Green Day probably played there before they blew up. But so it was more of a band scene, and it was all ages. I think they only served like coffee and water or something, no alcohol. But Drew Barrymore used to go there.
Yep. I used to live in San Diego, and whenever I'd go to LA, I would always see somebody famous or borderline famous. And one night we were at this small little club, and I knew this guy who had a label, and he brought in these. It was like a little like CD release party, and everybody was drinking shoju, that Korean stuff. Oh yeah. So we were all getting hammered on shoju, and then Carson Daly walks in, and a very small club. So it was such a weird moment, right? So Carson Daly walks in, and he's got these two statuesque, young African-American black girls. They looked like they could have been sisters, but they were certainly the same height and sort of the same sort of bone structure. Anyway, he walks in to the place first, and then they walk behind him. And then when he gets in, they take his coat off for him. And I'm like, dude, Carson Daly, man, did you like manufacture that entrance or what, man? And like that, to me, that was like LA in a nutshell. Like he couldn't just sort of walk into the club. He had to walk into the club first, two gals behind him, and then have this sort of like Elvis moment where they They take his jacket off.
Well, that reminds me of David Wilcock, because when he was blowing up, he moved to Malibu. Very nice house, right? So it was his 2012 run up. It was that period when
I think he was paying something like $14,000 a month for that place.
Well, so it was Kerry Cassidy and Bill Ryan. They were flanking Wilcock as they're like pushing through the crowd. It's like Elvis is in the building. Wilcock has like a black leather jacket. He has like some women next to him, and they're like, oh, that's the guy. It's David Wilcock. Of course, he's a Pisces. LA's very Neptunian, and he moved here to really ride that rocket ship, So
well, he lived in Malibu too, right by the ocean.
Yeah,
I used to love going to Gladstone's in Malibu. That was one of my favorite kind of go-to places out on the Pacific Coast side. But LA is weird, man. It is such a weird place.
Let me tell you too that say like the whole Manson family thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can look not just at the phenomenon of the Manson family, but the places where they were hanging out. LA's big, Robert. It's sprawling. So some of these areas, like I've only been to like once or twice, but that Santa Susana where they were hanging out, it's kind of like Simi Valley out there.
Mm-hmm.
And so the Manson family, they were hanging out at the Spawn Ranch.
Spawn Ranch, yeah.
Which was basically it's like an old movie.
Yeah, they used to do a lot of the American International pictures out there, the Roger Corman stuff. They would shoot a lot of that stuff at the Spawn.
A lot of cowboy stuff, but they
would also do biker movies out there and like occupy like a ghost town and shit like that. But yeah.
So I have a friend that she's moved out there now. And there's one, I forget which, it might be the 118, I can't remember, but there's a freeway that goes out there. But there's a point, so this is old Indian land.
Mm-hmm.
And let me tell you, Robert, I'm sensitive, but I'm not one to always go like, oh, I feel this. And like, wow, but let me tell you, when you start, it's the road kind of goes like this. And then when it starts heading down towards Simi Valley, you can feel an energy. And if you would pull off to the side of the road, there's all these kind of like big megalithic rocks and stuff. And they has like ancient Indian inscriptions and things like that. This is where the Manson family was hanging out. And Santa Susana is the site of the first official recorded nuclear meltdown. So you talk about portals being opened and strange energies, and
there's so much high strange in LA. So much high strange. There was a guy that I used to know a little bit, and I've told this story before. He was a comedian, very talented, very very talented guy, and he had a little cup of coffee in Hollywood. He was on Beverly Hills 90210.
Mm-hmm.
He actually had a kind of a semi-successful stint as an internet show like during the last election. Anyway, his father was the creator of the People's Court, right? And I met his dad, I met his mom. They're wonderful people, just really really wonderful people. And they were driving down the PCH, and some guy decided that he was going to do a U-turn like in the middle of the PCH, and they slammed into him, and they both passed away like instantly, right? Like instantly. And the person that witnessed the whole thing that was there on scene was Sharon Greg Allman's kid, Elijah Blue, right? I mean, this stuff just happens weirdly in LA, strange stuff like that. So you have Greg Allman and Cher's kid right there witnessing this whole thing. This guy who became pretty well known for kind of revolutionizing, he wasn't well known, but the show revolutionized TV. And then both of them left at the same time in this, kind of strange act of God, which I think is actually kind of beneficent in some ways. But there you go. I mean, to me, that's like LA in a nutshell in a lot of ways. So I want to switch gears a little bit.
Sure.
Because we can just go on and talk about this stuff, and all of a sudden it's just me and you. So I wanted to talk about this new financial system. I don't know if you've been paying attention to this thing, this quantum money system. Are you like tapped into this thing at all?
Does it have to do with the blockchain?
It does have to do with the blockchain, but the other thing with this is it has to do with, theoretically, this whole Nasara Gasara thing.
Oh, great.
So there's a guy by the name of Charlie Ward who seems to be the leading acolyte for the banging of the drum for this new financial system. So I just pulled this up and futurism.com, and it says new type of quantum money could enable galactic scale commerce and spooky action. Well, you know all about spooky action. Imagine that you wanted to buy something from Pluto, a planetoid so distant that takes light from the sun 5 hours to reach. According to University of Cambridge professor Adrian Kent, you might be able to pay for that purchase using S-money, a theoretical form of virtual money. He says can make financial transactions secure and speedy, and that can be scaled up to galactic distances. S-money draws on both quantum theory and relativity to enable ultra-fast, ultra-secure transfers of funds over essentially any distance. And while you likely aren't cursing your current inability to Venmo $20 to someone on Saturn, S-money, Saturn and Pluto, could also protect your funds from attacks by ultra-powerful quantum computers, which do pose an imminent cybersecurity threat here on Earth. So they're like framing this in a galactic sort of vocabulary here, which I think is quite interesting.
Well, I mean, we always need a medium of exchange, but it's the bankers now. They're going to start printing stuff in the quantum. It's even more esoteric now. Before we had the Fed, now it's going to be some weird quantum blockchain thing, So, by the way, on my Patreon, it's not one of my main focuses, but it's Pyramid Power on Patreon. We'll see how long I'm on there because I think Patreon they lost their lawsuit to Owen Benjamin.
Isn't that cool?
So they're probably going to go belly up, but I'm on there for now. But I cover Bitcoin and financial markets. So just as a cursory interest, and it's only my view. It's not financial advice. But I gave a signal a couple of weeks ago that I think was it Uranus went retrograde.
Yep.
So basically, the cryptocurrencies are Aquarian. So I think this retrograde action is going to go against crypto, being Aquarian. Uranus being the ruler of Aquarius. It runs until the end of the year. So I predict. I basically said, because Bitcoin's kind of been on a tear. I think it's it's been like 12 13 years.
And now it's starting to
there was
a retrograde. Yes.
There was like 1,000-point drop, but I basically said that I would expect the cryptocurrencies to go sideways or downtrend from here, and that's exactly what happened. I think, I don't know about this quantum thing they're working on, but I'm feeling that the cryptocurrencies could have a big run in 2021. But long term, I'm not so sure, because I think that the banks or the national governments, they want to transition to their own digital currencies, whereas the original idea of crypto, at least as it was sold to the public, was all about decentralization.
Yeah.
Where it's actually, I think that's a limited hang, and they just want to get people into the mode. So we'll see how long these things like Ethereum and Bitcoin run. But I think in the short term, like 2021, I also think that like the food shortage, the obvious, we're in the biggest economic meltdown and collapse in modern history,
which they're managing to keep fairly quiet as people focus on systemic racism, intersectionality.
Right. So basically, I think that the realization is going to hit with the mainstream public after the election. And then so 2021 is going to be another big step down economically. So, already gold and silver running the precious metals are political. So they've been suppressed for a long time, but it's starting to run now. And gold is at an all-time high. Silver, it touched like 30, I think, like that, something like that.
Mhm.
But if you look at the peak of silver in 1980, it was $50. But if you inflation adjust $50 in for 2020,
Mhm.
that $50 is $600. So I would say that silver, I think, could easily hit $100 an ounce. So I would say if people have the means, I would do kind of a shotgun approach. Get your food prep. Get your food prep, definitely.
Absolutely. Get your food prepped
Don't
up.
don't
Absolutely.
don't have too much in the bank. And I even said, not financial advice, but if people have like a 401k or IRA, some of these investment funds, they are not allowing what they call distribution now. So you cannot, depending on the company, they are saying you cannot pull out your own money, even with the tax penalty. So
Right.
I think all these things that are like a little bit out of reach, whether it's in the bank, where basically it's not cash in hand, right?
Well, they're closing the exits. That's what they're doing.
Exactly.
They're closing the exits. And this is what happened during the Depression. The building was on fire and they started to close the exits. And that's what's starting to happen now. I think you and I kind of met and connected around the time that I predicted a major downturn in Bitcoin. And
Probably.
that was February of 2 years ago, I think, roughly two
Mhm.
or two, and I looked at somebody asked me to look at Bitcoin, and I looked at the chart for Bitcoin, and I was like, oh, this is it. Bitcoin's going to take a big nosedive in February, and I think you might have even taken or sold some of your Bitcoin at that time. I can't remember.
I got in. Well, the thing is, I had some in like 2014, but I had Dogecoin, then went with the little Shiba dog.
Yeah.
That $5 turned into 30. I wish I would have bought more, but nobody knew at that time.
Yeah.
But I think that the thing with Bitcoin or the crypto markets in general right now, it is one of the most manipulated markets you can find. It's very high risk. You could look at the technical charts, but there's so many political factors that you really don't know what's going to happen. One of the things is one of the things they said about Bitcoin is like, oh, it's like quote unquote, you can't manipulate it. It's a set number of tokens, satoshis, blah blah blah. But what they didn't factor in is you might know, the Tether token.
Yeah.
It's a USDT. So basically, the cryptocurrency exchanges, if they deal with a national currency like US dollars, it falls under very strict regulation. But the way they get around that, a lot of these crypto exchanges, is they have what they call stable coin, or it's a token. Mm-hmm. So one Tether is supposed to be equivalent to $1 US. So it's kind of like a halfway step. Or you can be in a position of cryptocurrency and then cash out and sit in Tether until you want to like move it out or whatever. But the thing with Tether is it's basically they're printing it just like the Fed. So it's inflated the whole crypto market. Mm-hmm. Tether is under investigation by the New York Attorney General right now. So just that alone, if Tether was to get taken out, that would collapse the crypto market by at least half. Ooh, yeah. And what's also interesting is Tether, EOS. There's a number of coins that connected to this guy, Brock Pierce, mm-hmm. who was originally a Hollywood child actor, who was directly involved in the Den Entertainment pedophile.
Oh, I went to Den. I was at. I was at Den in 1990. I think it was 99. I think it might have been at Den, and I was working on a project. We were going to go basically around the edge of America, and I had a sponsorship deal lined up with Hyundai. We were going to stream. It was like, and Hyundai was on board. They were going to provide cars, and so we were looking for a streaming partner. And den was brought to my attention through a publicist that I knew.
Right.
So we went down there, and the den, I think they're in Santa Monica, and the offices would have blown your mind. I mean, it was like it was packed with, Gen Xers, these young Gen Xers, and there were like, high speed, top of the line, Apples everywhere, and they were actually pioneering stuff that was on. They were way ahead of YouTube, and their whole thing was doing like 15-minute shows and 15-minute content, and their big sponsor was Ford. And so we actually met with the executives of Den, not the guy you're talking about who was involved in the pedophilia stuff out in Calabasas.
Yeah.
But again, it's that whole high strange with LA.
Well, you know, Robert, that when you're dealing with Aquarian energies, the Aquarius does rule unusual tastes and LGBT. Not, it is what it is. I'm not saying it's good or bad, but if you look at technology, especially, I'm Japanese American, but Japanese background, it's interesting that every generation of audiovisual has always had porn as part of it. That was, like the chapters on the DVD, that was specifically made in consultation with the Japanese porn industry to, because, right? You tell me, doesn't Aquarius, it has to do with technology, but then it has to do with unusual tastes and those kind of things.
Aquarius is kinky, man. It's a kinky sign.
Yeah.
Everybody that I've ever known who has the moon in Aquarius is a little kinky, and not in the bad way,
Right.
And a lot of, I've noticed that a lot of, not a lot, but certain Aquarian moon people I've met are very voyeuristic. They're into, they're into watching. That's that Aquarian kind of observational thing. Let's jump into this thing a little bit here. Right. I've been scrolling on this article, and one of the things that I wanted to share with you, and you're probably aware of this, but Australia just basically eliminated about 5 or 6 tokens from Binance. Like, they're just saying,
oh, really? Okay.
Yes. So now what we're seeing, we're beginning to see the digital currency and crypto purge. That's happening. And there are going to be some cryptos that are going to be out there that are going to be essentially worthless because they are not going to be the approved cryptos by certain governments. Right. Now, this guy, Charlie Ward, is sort of at the epicenter of this Gesara quantum financial thing. And it's very much connected to Trump, Q, the underground bases, basically doing an end around with the Rothschilds, debt forgiveness, a jubilee. This is sort of the language and the system of the reset. And one of the really what they are pushing is they're pushing XRP Ripple.
Yeah, that's the Rothschild. That's a banker coin.
It's a total banker coin. It was set up by people who used to work for the World Bank.
Yep.
And this is the token that they've wanted to connect to Belt and Road. That they want to have the Belt and Road and XRP Ripple to be this quantum currency. But I don't know how this guy can promote XRP Ripple. So and do it with an absolute straight face and a clear conscience.
So Robert, I just went to gematrix.org. I put in XRP Ripple. It's a gematria calculator.
Yeah.
So guess what? Guess what other terms match with Ripple XRP?
What?
It's pyramids.
Oh.
The high priestess.
Right.
Remember, Satan is real.
Oh.
Apple computer.
Interesting.
Humans meet aliens. Energy gobbling. The beast of the earth. Blood drinker, flesh eater.
Oh shit.
So people can look this up. It's gematrix.org, and you can put in XRP Ripple. And I just took a cursor. Oh, NATO Death Squad. So again, some of these things with like ciphers and Bible codes and numerology and gematria is the Kabbalistic numerology.
Yeah.
You can't say for sure, but once you get like 5-10 like very unusual hits, it'll give you the flavor of the term you're dealing with. And XRP Ripple, some interesting matches. I just looked.
So very interesting. So let's go over this Nasara thing. And according to this guy, Nasara is the most groundbreaking reformation to sweep not only the United States of America, but the whole planet, thus Gesara, I guess global, right?
Uh-huh.
And in its entire history, the act does away with the Federal Reserve Bank, the IRS, the shadow government, and much more. Nasara implements the following changes. It zeroes out all credit card, mortgage, and other bank debt due to illegal banking and government activities, a global debt jubilee, or forgiveness of debt, and abolishes the income tax. Okay. So can we just break that down for just a moment here, right? So how does it do it? Does it do it because it creates a completely alternative financial universe? And what are they basing this on? Are they basing this on Leo Wanta's like hidden money? Or, I mean, how are they? Because there has to be some form or basis of kind of collateralization in exchange. What is it based on?
Well, people see the QAnon or Q people. Q has kind of absorbed or incorporated a lot of memes that were going on for decades. Yeah. So if you were in like the Christian Patriot or those kind of circles in the 90s, mm-hmm. the seed of so-called Nasara was there. They were talking about it like 25 years ago, something like that. Right. And it's been repackaged. I think this is all leading to, like you're saying, it's more control. Could be some like UBI, universal basic income. I never bought into the whole Nasara thing. It to me, it's another one of these like religious thinking and sit back, you don't have to worry because the white hats, they're just gonna do the debt forgiveness and everything. I don't see that happening. If it's a total like year zero reset, you better think about especially if it's Ripple, that was set up by the Rothschilds.
Absolutely.
So if the reset in Nasara, your savior is like the Red Shield bankers, I mean, you got to think twice about that.
Oh, absolutely. This is a really interesting highlight that I have here. So apparently it creates a new U.S. Treasury rainbow currency. Now, I've been reading about the rainbow money exchange for decades. Mm-hmm. And I started to read about it through this publication that George Green was putting out, where this woman was channeling this Pleiadian high commander. Is it Pleiadian? Yeah, Pleiadian high commander named Hatton. Okay. So I used to get these newsletters, and Jimmy Brent was associated with George Green during that time. So I would love to talk to Jimmy about this at some point. And they were talking about the rainbow money exchange, and that when the rainbow money exchange came, like that would be a sign of the end times. Like once they converted, the dollar bill into this, and when I say rainbow, like the bills will have different colors. One will be red, one will be yellow, one will be purple, one will be blue. And that was something that was always like a red flag to these people. And that would have been also tied to this idea of the North American Union. So apparently this is part of this thing, this rainbow money exchange.
Well, the rainbow is one of the symbols of Aquarius.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So Gesara releases huge amounts of money. Like, where is that money coming from? Where is it coming from? There was this guy, Leo Wanted. You know about Leo Wanted? You know his story?
It's a secret fund.
Yeah. So is this the Leo Wanta money? I mean, where is this money coming from?
Robert, I think that people need to be decentralized and doing their own thing, because They're going to roll out so many things that, I think it won't be a surprise to people like us that have been following it.
Yeah.
But you're not really going to you're not going to want to be part of these new systems that they're rolling out,
Yeah.
Because it's not, it's literally the bankers. It's the same people that jack this world up. Now they're gonna save it. They're gonna do a debt jubilee. I don't think so. If they do a debt jubilee and they put you on the UBI, well, then you're gonna have to take your shots. You can't say any weird stuff on the internet. Got to wear your mask.
So what do you think of this statement? Putin and Trump are like brothers. They're working extremely closely together. Trump is working closely with Putin, President Xi Jinping of China, and Prime Minister Modi of India. The four of them are working very closely together. What do you think of that?
Well, like you've said, which Putin are you talking about? Because there's like six of them that are obviously there's Putin doubles, but Putin as a figure, both Trump and Putin are very close to Chabad, which is it's an end time Kabbalistic cult, and Jared Kushner and Ivanka are deep in it. So that's interesting. You have the leaders of two of the most powerful countries in the world connected to an Abrahamic end times cult. That's a little disturbing, And I told you also that although Trump is sort of anti-China, I think Russia is defending its interests, but they're kind of in the middle about the One Belt, One Road. There's been a hard split in the last couple years in the right and left, the far left and far right. The people might have seen some of this, the rise of the Eurasia topic. On 4chan, a lot of the younger men on the internet got very interested there's this whole movement towards traditionalism as a reaction to the degeneration of the culture.
Absolutely.
They got very interested in Russia, Central Asia, the old Soviet sphere. And Alexander Dugin, who's Russian thinker, political thinker. Dugin was proposing what they call the fourth political theory.
Yep.
Which is post-communism, post-capitalism, post-fascism. But the idea of 4PT was to combine elements of the far right and far left under a new ideology against Western liberalism, right? Interestingly enough, Dugin was a Crowleyite.
Yep.
He comes from a Bolshevik family, and that they all came from a certain background. He's probably a Sabbatean. He ran as a Thelemite in the 90s. He probably got like 15 votes. But the logo of 4PT, the fourth political theory, is the Chaos Star. Right? Interesting. Yep. But a thing with Dugin is that he's a one belt, one road. Even if he says he's syncretic, he comes from a Bolshevik background. So he definitely comes from the socialist communist direction. And one thing you'll notice is, we talked about this off air, it's interesting that a lot of these leftists, the Antifas, the Black Lives Matter, they in general see China as some kind of utopia, which is crazy to me because I've lived in China. Any of these leftists, go to China.
Yeah.
Not about the Chinese people, but the system.
Yeah.
Not a system I would want to live under. And they're trying to roll that out now in like Australia, other places.
They are going hardcore Chinese democracy in Australia right now.
So, but what was interesting is you did have a group of these internet, it's mostly young men, very into these ideas under 4PT. But then there was a hard split a couple of years ago where the left and right elements could no longer have a common ground over the China factor, because the right-wing fascists, they said, like, no way. We're more of a nationalist-minded, this one belt, one road how's it going to help us? But the left elements, for whatever reason, they're still on board with because another way to rephrase it is Dugin presented the unipolar world, right? It used to be Soviet Union, USSR, and the US.
Right.
You had two poles that played off each other. Then the USSR fell. The unipolar world, right? The Francis Fukuyama, this is the end of history. This is it. It's this neoliberalism into the future, right?
Mm-hmm.
Dugin, he proposed the multipolar world, the end of America as the pinnacle or the shot caller of the world, to the new system of the multipolar world, where you have the Latin sphere, you had the Asian sphere, you have the European sphere, and no one power dominates. But Robert, that's just like an advertising job, because whoever has the money that runs the bank runs the world.
Yeah,
and they've set up China to be the new master. So there's been a hard split of right and left over that topic, which a lot of people, they probably wouldn't even know about because it's not written about.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're in these circles, it's plainly obvious that it's happened. And another thing that's interesting too is, even though some of the right fascist elements are very white nationalist, they're either neutral or in bed with the Zionist elements.
Oh, almost always.
So, and it's funny because they could be totally so-called anti-Semitic, but on the playing board, they're more open to Zionists than Chinophile.
Well, Zionism is a nationalistic movement.
Yeah.
It is a nationalistic movement, and that's why it has been translated into this version of nationalism in the U.S. And you have sort of the neocons were engaged in the kind of the promotion of Zionism until Trump got there, and then they went back to their kind of Trotskyite sort of neoliberal sort of hangout once Trump got in, because they didn't like him. Right. They were able to embrace Zionism on their terms. But when somebody else was dictating what Zionism looked like or who the players were going to be, they didn't want any part of it. So you had Bill Kristol and all these other kind of neocons, you're going back into their Trotskyite roots. So now, this new sort of breed of Zionism is being forwarded by people like Jack Posobiec and Mike Cernovich, and they don't talk about it. But that's exactly what they're promoting, and it's been in the alt-right. I think in a lot of ways has benefited to some degree with this shotgun wedding with Zionism to some degree, but not completely. It's benefited because there was funding involved. Like Breitbart is funded in part by Zionists, right? And Breitbart became this kind of sort of soapbox for first it was Steve Bannon, right? And when he was running it, and of course Steve Bannon has no problems not only calling himself a Zionist, but Steve Bannon also calls himself a Leninist, and he actually quotes Lenin, and he's really into Lenin's idea of chaos and creating chaos. So when we get into these circles, these people have these these various belief systems and ideologies. It's really interesting once you dig a little bit deeper beneath the surface.
Well, one thing about Trump is that, hey, he's an interesting guy. If you look at him and you're not, of course, I think most of your listeners, they're more favorable to Trump. But let's say you were on the left. If you just took a step back, Gemini, Sun conjunct Uranus, the guy's like highly interesting as a figure.
He's very interesting, and he's very smart.
But I think what a lot of Trumpers have not really taken to heart is Trump was elected on chaos.
Absolutely.
On the Pepe the Frog meme and internet and 4chan, I deal with the numerology. 4 in numerology is the number of Aquarius. So 4chan is like the chaos chan, So, but the thing is that Trump he's a disruptor, right?
Absolutely.
He was elected on chaos magic. He,
Mhm.
and we talked about Norman Vincent Peale, power of positive thinking. He's a magician. But when you open that door of, and he could have done it just on his own because Trump embodies that energy. When you use that to rise to power, you see chaos has no master.
Right.
So,
Absolutely. Once you open the gates.
so this is what
You open
people
the
have
gates.
to consider. And a lot of us were looking at the timeline of what was going to happen to America. That 2024 year seems very big. Before Trump got in, we were looking at this, right? But Trump, he's naturally stirring the pot just from who he is. One tweet, kofefe, people go nuts. But the revealing and the implosion are one and the same. That's what people have to understand.
Yeah.
Yes, these things have to come out. They would not have come out on whatever Q is. They would not have come out unless it was Trump. But what I'm seeing, and if you just look at the transits and those kinds of things, I don't see a return to Camelot. I don't see a return to like the good old days of America.
Mm-mm.
Trump is definitely so-called God chosen to be there and doing what he's doing, because anybody else probably would have got kicked out or like killed, by now. But I don't think America can handle this kind of like the stirring. It can't handle the reality of the issues we're dealing with. But I'll say this also: it's also interesting now that the DNC and the left Democrats, they seem less able to ride chaos than Trump, because now these Antifas are burning down the houses, or they're going to the houses of these mayors.
Oh, right? Yeah, I talked about that before you got on. They wanted to turn Ted Wheeler's condominium into a birthday cake.
So now
everything, yeah.
So now it's like they've created the golem.
They've created the golem. The golem is loose now.
Mob. Yeah. The golem is
it's
like
loose. They can't control
it. Yeah.
Yeah. So. And they want to be able to to call it in, but they can't. And now, I don't know, like the last 72 hours, there have been all these supposed cop shootings of these, young people, right? Young black males. And one of them happened apparently in Washington, D.C. And the kid had a gun, right? He had a gun. Yeah.
But they're going to ride anyway. It doesn't matter.
Right. So that whole thing is now, even if that was initiated and you would have these events that were like semi-staged, which I do believe they were. Like I totally think that the Breonna Taylor thing was staged. I totally think that Ahmaud Arbery was staged. George Floyd, question mark, all over that thing. But again, then it begins to take on a life of its own. And then it's like, well, now what do we do? Now we got a kid who's, not part of the mix. He's not part of the plan. We weren't planning on this kid, right? And now all of a sudden that happens. But do they really care at that point? Is that going to justify, the means to their end, and what kind of deleterious effect does it have on this So I think both sides are sort of dealing with this chaos factor in some ways, and nobody really knows how to handle chaos unless you've actually lived through a lot of chaos in your life. And I've lived through a lot of chaos, so I think I'm kind of okay for the most part.
I think this is a benefit of being a reader, and obviously Robert Phoenix, professional astrologer, professional reader. I do numerology, and I'm also stand on the shoulders of people like you, Robert. I've learned a lot. But I know that there's readers in your audience. So the thing is that when you begin to do esoteric readings, whether it's professionally or as a hobby, you have to start trusting yourself. Because nobody can tell, technically, if you're pulling cards or based on the chart, yes, technically it's like, well, this aspect means this, but there's always an intuitive element also, and nobody can tell you, no external person can tell you, okay, what's the read of what's going on? And the more that you begin to trust your intuition, you begin to separate and not be sucked into this clone mind of our Aquarian age. You want to be that higher aspect of the organic planetary consciousness. And this is what most of the public is lacking, is that they're reading the above board and getting emotionally triggered, whereas most professional readers are looking at it like a few steps removed and looking at the bigger.
Well, it depends on where their perspective is too, though. I would agree with you, but there are people who are readers who are like, there were readers that were very anti-Trump, and man, they will say this guy's going down and this guy's going down and it's not going to, this is before he even got elected. And I'm like, you read that thing wrong because your bias got in the way.
Right. Well, the thing is that a good reader, it's not like what I want to see, but what's in the chart. Or let's say like, a lot of us were talking about what 2020 in general, we had some idea this was going to be a major year. So it's not like what I wanted to happen in 2020. It was what did I see coming? And I think this is very key, especially for, you've had some shows about maybe some of the possible earth changes and things coming. And I'm not this kind of person to talk about this sort of thing, but I'm seeing it starting to come into focus, maybe around that 2024 near eclipse.
No doubt. No doubt.
So I want to bring this up because it's an interesting metaphor. You may know Goro Adachi. He does the time reverse.
Yeah, he was great. I used to really get into his stuff on his website back around 2010.
So he was the one. Now, he didn't coin this term, but some people call it synchromysticism, right? Looking at the solar cycle versus, and then matching the news items to see like what the patterns are. And basically, he says we are at the end of time and we're facing another flood.
Totally.
Right?
Totally. Absolutely.
So one of the things he mentions is in the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is basically the Noah story.
It's a Noah story. Yeah, Utnapishtim and Enlil. Yeah.
So basically, Noah was told that the flood was coming, but he was not told directly. Like basically, I think it would be the Enki, the Prometheus, Lucifer.
It was Enlil. Enlil he has a dialogue with Utnapishtim.
Okay, so it was Enlil, but he whispered around a corner. Basically, the angels told the Noah character, the flood's coming.
Right.
So prepare your people. So you'll survive. But in a general sense, this is the benefit of knowing like I would say true intelligence is pattern recognition.
Absolutely.
And that has a lot to do with astrology or numerology or feng shui, all these esoteric systems that are basically reading the Saturn matrix, right?
Yeah.
So we are being told what is to come. And if you're listening to Robert Phoenix's show, you're probably more well prepared than 99% of people. But knowing these cycles, just seeing what's playing out, I think people should really consider what are you going to do post-Trump and what are you going to do post-USA? Because I think USA has 50 states. The time is running short. It's probably going to break into like zones or federations or something like that. And it's all in the cycle work. So I just wanted to say that because I think, Robert, that this is all going to, I'm not a pessimist, but I'm a realist. I do not see the full rollout of this technocracy system that they're pushing right now. I do not feel it's really going to work out the way they want. But with all the money in the world and the kind of power that they have, what's it going to be that's going to stop the full rollout of the system? I'm thinking it has to be some kind of major earth changes or some kind of solar events, an EMP pulse, something. And I think it's going to be better after, because basically we are in the transition of ages.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like these like couple thousand year turns. Actually, we're at the reset of the Great Year, which is like 26,000 years.
Yep.
So there's turbulence, and I think that we're just like in the so-called birthquake right now. So it's very chaotic. I think it's going to end up in a better place. But we ain't even hit the hard part yet.
No. We'll look back on this time
Yeah.
as being, the good old days of, summer 2020. Remember the good old days of summer 2020? Yeah, I mean, so when people are fragmented, and when cultures are fragmented, when a country is fragmented, like that fragmentation will manifest geophysically.
Oh yeah.
It has to. So I don't think there's I think the chances of significant earth changes are, you could astrologically, Uranus and Taurus, we could talk about that for, a while if we wanted to, but it's really connected to just how fragmented we are as a society. And I don't think there's any putting it back. Like Humpty Dumpty is broken. It is broken. And all the king's horses and all the king's men are not going to be able to put Humpty back together again. It's just not going to happen unless there is something that is so intense or catastrophic or apocalyptic or whatever those things are, that all of a sudden everybody who has been scattered and fragmented all wants to get together and let's figure this thing out. That's the only thing that could bring this kind of system or a system back together. And theoretically, they can manufacture some of those things if they wanted to in some ways, if they wanted to. But I also think that if they did manufacture that in some ways, whether it's a fake alien invasion or, a massive EMP or something like that, that they run the risk of losing control.
Well, you know what? Chaos has no master, right, Robert?
That's
so
right.
Even the controllers, the best made plans, they don't quite work out.
Yeah.
And then also just the transits that are going on. Uranus and Taurus till 2026. Neptune and Pisces till 2026. So that's literal Earth changes.
We got the Saturn-Neptune conjunction. And that's going to start to happen when Saturn goes into Pisces. That's a very, very significant period. And that's when the Soviet Union was formed. It was when Saturn was conjunct Neptune, right? So it's a major sea change with structures and organization and governance. And during that time, it will become much more fluid and in some ways much more Piscean, right? And yet we'll still be cranking up this Aquarian energy as Pluto right at that time moves into Aquarius. Is it going to be 2025? 2025 is 2024 and 2025. Those are key years. Those are really significant years, like with the eclipse, which we've talked about a little bit, which will be in Aries. Like that eclipse is going to be in Aries. And that's going to basically come right through the center of this country and like right through my backyard and right up to Canada. And the last eclipse started. Now, this is really important to understand. The last eclipse started right off the coast of Washington and Oregon.
Well, the sign of the symbol of Aquarius being the rainbow. And we're basically, to some people's mind, officially starting the Aquarian age this year. It's going to take like 200 years to fully be in it, but seems like we officially start this year. Why wouldn't we have a breaking of the water in this next 6 years? Why wouldn't we have some kind of like flood event? And what comes after the flood? It's the rainbow. Some people say the rainbow was God's promise he wouldn't do the flood again, but we may have some, not the end of everything, but we may have some major water events to kind of demarcate. Okay, the water broke, it's the birthquake, and now you're in the Aquarian age.
Yeah. Well, that's right. The water bear, there it is, right? Coming down. Wow, this has been quite a journey today, Masaki.
Oh yeah. So, I didn't know what we were going to talk about, but when you have Robert Phoenix here, we could go in any direction. So,
Well, I think I did have the quantum money thing, and which and look, I don't want to necessarily poo-poo it because I think it was back in I was around 2007, 2008. I was really like obsessed with this idea. Even like I think maybe earlier than that, like maybe like the late 90s, I was obsessed with this idea that zeros and ones were flowing through me right now, and that those zeros and ones were actually monetary exchange. And I just thought about that. It's like right now, even as you and I speak, maybe more you than me because you're in LA, that these financial transactions that are happening literally through the Ethernet and through the cell phone towers, they're actually going through you. Millions of dollars right now are passing through you in this moment. And I'm like, that's a really interesting kind of thing to wrap your head around. And if that we could somehow transform that or embody that or turn that into sort of like an operating principle for our own lives, then it becomes to me, it's interesting. And now we're dealing with like an economy of light.
Well, the like Bitcoin, which is the gold standard, although there's many cryptocurrencies now, that was basically the first one.
Yeah.
It is not quantum computer proof. So
no, it's not.
So that's and I've brought this up on crypto forums. I said like, well, to the mainstream public, it's not an issue yet, but there are quantum computers, so that security level is not safe from the quantum computers. To get around that, maybe you would have to have a quantum crypto. So,
Yeah. Well, certainly we're going to have some challenges. And the challenges are going to be around survival. Like that's going to be a challenge. The challenge is going to be around living above a survival line because, nobody surviving is okay. Right. But we've just come off of, roughly 100 years of modulated prosperity. And a lot of people are not going to be able to kind of live or deal at a survival level very easily. And in some ways, nor should they. There has to be another level up where we're actually not just surviving, but working towards something new in that place. I think that's critical. If we're just surviving, then we're on the clock, right? And because at some point, time is going to run out.
Well, what I've been seeing, and I think you've been very busy, right, Robert? I know at least 24 esoteric people were like more busy in this lockdown than before the lockdown. So definitely the esoteric and metaphysical area is hot. Yeah, and it should be hot, like Uranus and Taurus, until like 2026. So I think that I really think that the fringe people and the outliers, if you really want to do it, this is your time, because guess what? The normies are totally lost. And I also noticed that there's just a hard splitting happening in a lot of our friends, family, people that we know. Some of them, they're not bad people, but they just do not fit in the new world we're moving into. And it's almost becoming like I don't want to see this in a mean way, but the whole thing Tom Montauk talked about, where they're like sort of like NPCs.
Yeah,
and it's like now the mask is off because you're just seeing people running these programs of the mask and like the 6 feet, and it's like where's the person that I knew? Like their personality is getting totally drained out. Of course, it's probably out of fear. They don't know how to process what's happening. But it seems to me like a lot of the esoteric people that we know, the people that didn't really fit before, now are starting to excel. So that's a positive side. And I think that the only caveat is I think that do not expect things in the background to be calm. Like, I'm very busy, but I'm experiencing everything back. I'm in, like I told him many times, I'm in Adam Schiff's district in LA, and Gavin Newsom, the Getty, is our governor. Yeah. So I'm living it against this kind of background. But personally, I think it was probably the best moves I ever made to do my own business and be in this area where maybe it's even better that we're in this fringe, like woo woo kind of area, because it's to some people's mind, it's not as political, but actually it's very subversive. So,
Oh yeah.
Uh-huh.
I mean, I never fit in. I just never fit in. I stumbled upon a .com gig for about 5 years
Mhm.
because of my knowledge of music and my ability to write and some of my connections. And then once that was over, like there was really no going back for me at that point. Like that 5 years was, kind of my, I don't know, kind of found money in a lot of ways. But when I did go back to it briefly, but the world had changed so much in the time that I was away that that it was just no longer a fit for me. And so, here we are, we're out here, carving out a path in the wilderness, and we're not alone. And ultimately, we're in this time of Gemini where, this is a time where you can make a pivot, right? You can make a pivot now. If you want to make a pivot, you can do that. And it's really about finding something inside of yourself where you can, bring it out and either perfect it or capitalize on it or integrate it into your life. And this is a really good sort of segue to what I want to talk about, which is the event that you're going to be at in here in Texas. And I'm so happy that you're going to be here because you're going to be talking about pyramids and the sort of the planetary pyramid sort of landscape. And you're also going to be playing music, which is really cool. You're going to be Akaida on Saturday night. So we're going to get a double dose of Masaki right there, which is going to be fantastic. And, but the thing that I'm encouraging for people that are going to attend is that if you have a skill or you have a gift, bring it. There's a woman from Montana who is a sound healer, and she's going to offer sound healing. The Crimmies will be there, and they'll have some of their books for sale. And so I'm encouraging people to bring things to this event, right? And to not be shy. And if you have a product that you want to sell while you're there, you can do that. I'm not going to ask for any of your money, right? Or you want to trade, or you want to exchange, or you want to offer it up as a service to somebody, so I'm encouraging this, and I'm just totally psyched that you're coming. I wanted you to come last year, but the
date changed when I went
to Spain last year, right?
Yeah. So, I think that the response was great last year, but I also think that people should really thank Robert Phoenix here, because it's not often that there's a space created where people like us can come that's not managed somehow. Because if you go to Contact in the Desert, if you go to Whole Life Expo, you're going to see holistic people there. But that it's a lot of those places I just don't want to go, because it's not going to be like your event. Yours has a personal touch, but also I feel comfortable with with what you do, the circles and things that you've set up. Because one thing, like we were talking about the music before, right? One of the things that I got into music scene for, or underground music scene, is because psychic people got psychic people problems, and I was kind of looking for my tribe. But what I didn't understand is even the indie music scene, especially here in LA, is just a smaller version of the mainstream industry. So it's a music business. I was looking for friends in the music business, which is probably the last place you want to be. Okay. Then I did many years interacting with My Labs, MK Ultras. I was doing interviews, just trying to map out the reality we live in.
Yeah.
Nothing against MKs in this area, but it's an interesting intellectual topic, but they're not necessarily people you want to hang out with.
Oh my God. Oh God.
So So you can imagine the kind of mental, emotional ringer I've been through for like decades.
Yeah.
So to find somebody like Robert Phoenix, where we get to, have interesting talks, exchange ideas, but then, the response to last year's Hill Country meetup was excellent. I've interacted with people in the chat, and I just think it's great. So just want to thank you, and we can have fun and be with our tribe, So
yeah, no, and I'm grateful that you're coming, because in baseball there's a term called a 5-tool player, and you're like a 5-tool player. So that's fantastic, and I've got some events planned for us that are going to be fun. These are events that are basically to get you out of your head. All right, we're going to have some head stuff. We're going to have discussions. We're going to have panels. I'm going to present. Masaki's going to present. But we're going to have like non-head stuff. And that's really important. So, I'll leave the link here in the description for the show for the sign up. I need to nail everything and line it up by the 10th. And I will tell you that flights are still really cheap. They're really, really cheap. And here's the thing that I was kind of struggling a little bit for a while with, will I be able to pull this thing off before everything goes off the rails? Like, that was the thing that, and I kept kind of wading into this thing, like into the deep end of the pool. And then at some point it was like, okay, we just got to go. And this is go time. And I'm not saying this to create any kind of fear or create any kind of real, synthetic urgency, but I'm not sure you're going to be able, or we're going to be able to get together in this way, like moving forward.
Oh yeah.
In the weeks and the months to follow. Okay. So you may want to get some of this time under your belt so that you can actually bring something back to where you are. And by the way, you don't know who you're going to meet. That's the other thing. You just don't know who you're going to meet.
Well, you got to put yourself out there. I mean, the thing is for me, Robert, I don't know if you looked at my chart, but I'm double fixed. I'm a Scorpio Sun, Taurus rising. So I actually have to force myself to be a little more, adventurous. But it's when you allow that space for the magic to happen.
Yeah.
That's because, I tend to, especially a lot of the East Asians, they overplan. Right. If you try to like map out every step, you're actually blocking out the possibilities that you need a little bit of play to let the magic happen. And I think
absolutely
that's a great part about, going to an event, meeting people. And another thing that people from the old Eastern Bloc would say is it's not really about, we're getting more and more locked down in this time right now, but it's more about what can you do with the freedom that you have. And a lot of people, even though we're in a lockdown, right? They, like you're saying, they don't realize how much freedom they still have.
That's right.
So it's time to, use some of that freedom, so.
Yep. Use it while you can. Use it or lose it, as they say. You know who's a Scorpio with a Taurus rising? Regina.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
okay.
Regina Meredith, a Taurus Scorpio rising. You've never been on her show, have you?
No, I've watched it.
But you should be on her show.
Okay.
Also, I mean, I don't think I'll be on her show again, but I could certainly suggest you. I think you'd be a really good guest on her show. You guys would get along because you're very neutral. I think I became less than neutral for. Well, I love Regina. Don't get me wrong. I really love her. She's great, and I've met a lot of really great people connected through her. But it was pretty clear at a certain point that, I became more of a burden for her than a blessing, I think, with her audience.
I definitely have my ideas, but I think I have a good balance of the Scorpionic, the deep occult or the esoteric, but I have the Taurian, the Taurus practicality. So it's basically pulling from the unseen or the metaphysical. But okay, knowing that, how do we practically apply it? And then also, I actually because now everything's so heavily like web-based or apps like Instagram, I try to distill it down to the least amount of words. I try not to be too wordy, because for the average person, we have limited time. Even I format it to be easily read on a smartphone, because the time we're in, I'm not, we could talk about these deep topics forever, but especially for the average person, it's like, okay, how do we convey this information in the most digestible, easy way possible?
Yeah, we are in information overload too. There's just too much information, and people are swimming in, just piles and piles of data, and they could be a bit overwhelming. So bite-sized chunks are sort of advisable.
Let me say another thing is, you have a lot of supporters, a lot of viewers, but if you're watching this video, if you enjoy Robert Phoenix's, daily breakdowns, right? The 15 minutes of flame, Friday FARcast, Sunday live stream, support Robert, because what he's doing is, is great information, but there's a lot of time and effort that you put in. And I think that, people subscribe to Freeman, people subscribe to other shows, support Robert, because I think it's very valuable. If you've been around and you've looked at different, shows, YouTubes, whatever, what you present is very high quality. And I tend to agree with most of what you say, and it's on the mark. Like I said, a lot of it, we may have our personal opinions, but I think the true test is, it's not what we want to be true, but can you accurately forecast what's coming? And I think what you've put out, it has been time tested and proven to be accurate. So that's what I really, besides the time and effort you put in, that's the mark of excellence of what Robert Phoenix does, is that he's accurate. And that's very valuable in the time we're in. Do you have the right intel? Do you have the right data points? And does Robert Phoenix is he pointing in the right direction? And are these things falling into place? To my eye, everything, 99% of the things that you put out are very accurate. So it's very valuable. So if,
thank you. First of all, thank you. And that's a real compliment coming from you, because you have a great filter. You're a Scorpio. You're like a laser, right? So you're not going to miss a lot of things. So thank you. I really appreciate that. And, I do enjoy what I do. It is a lot of work. And, I don't know what else I'd be doing right now, but sometimes I have a fantasy about driving a propane truck every now and then. Like, I'm just going to give it up and go drive a propane truck for a while, right? But I don't think it's going to happen. And I don't know where it's going. And I don't think anybody really knows where anything is going. And I think the best thing that we can do is sort of do our best to be in the moment and create what we need to create. Look a little ways down the line, so we have a few support systems, but not too far down the line, because number one, that's paralytic, and number two, we are in a rapidly changing river right now. So, and that's kind of where I'm at. And, I try to, lay it all on the line every day, with still enough to be able to leave behind and do some other things. And, so we'll have a lot of conversations like this, and, in October, and I'm really looking forward to meeting you in person. So thank you for the compliment, and thank you for being here. And you could go to, Masaki's website, Akaida.com, right? It's Akaida.com or Akaida.tv.
Akaida.com, Pyramid Power on Patreon,
right.
Akaida TV on YouTube.
Akaida TV, that was the other piece.
And I will have, I'm not going to really bring, I'm definitely going to bring my largest power pyramid. I showed it on your show. The one that was so strong, it interrupted the audio.
Wow, that was crazy, man. That was like...
So I'm going to bring that one to do a little group pyramid meditation. So if people are interested, I'm probably going to just take it to Texas, and then we'll see what happens. If anybody's interested, I will have that. But a lot of the smaller stuff is too bulky to bring, but I will have a lot of energy, like tensor ring pendants I'll bring. So those will be available if you're at the Hill Country.
Great.
Harvest Meetup.
Excellent. Great show. Thanks for being here. We've had about 150 for the majority of the stream today.
Uh-huh.
And thank you guys for being here. That's it. I'll be back on Sunday night, and we're going to be doing Sunday Night Astro Live. And I'm gonna look at the chart of Antifa. Yes, Antifa has a chart. They were founded on a very specific day. So we're going to look at the astrological roots of Antifa, and of course, we'll have some other tidbits along the way. Masaki, have a great day. Everybody else, you guys take care, and I'll see you all on Sunday night. Okay. All right. Bye for now.